The screams of dying starships echoed across the void above Terra as the greatest betrayal in human history reached its climax. The siege of Terra had raged for months, with the palace walls cracking under the relentless assault of the traitor legions. When Horus finally lowered the shields of his flagship, the Vengeful Spirit, it seemed like desperation, a final gambit from a cornered beast. The Emperor of Mankind, accompanied by Rogel Dorn and Sanguinius, teleported aboard the massive battle barge to confront the fallen Warmaster in his seat of power. The confrontation that followed would reshape the galaxy forever. Sanguinius fell first, his golden wings broken and his noble heart pierced by Horus's corrupted talon. The Emperor's beloved son, the Angel of Baal, died protecting his father from the thing his brother had become. When the Master of Mankind finally faced Horus in the ship's command throne room, he gazed upon a creature barely recognizable as his once favored son. The Chaos Gods had transformed the Warmaster into something monstrous, his armor fused with demonic flesh, his eyes burning with the malevolent power of the warp, his very presence radiating corruption that made reality itself recoil. The duel between father and son lasted only minutes, but those moments determined the fate of humanity. Horus, empowered by all four Chaos Gods, struck down the Emperor with such force that the psychic shockwave rippled across Terra. Yet in that moment of triumph, as the Warmaster prepared to deliver the killing blow, he hesitated. For an instant, the real Horus, the loyal son who had once stood at his father's side, broke through the layers of corruption. The Emperor saw this flicker of his true child and seized the moment, unleashing the full fury of his psychic might. The blast didn't just destroy Horus's physical form, it obliterated his soul completely, ensuring that the Chaos Gods could never resurrect their greatest champion. With their Warmaster dead and the Emperor mortally wounded, the traitor forces found themselves leaderless and facing the full wrath of the loyalist legions. The sons of Horus, witnessing their Gene father's complete annihilation, fell into shock and disarray. Without Horus's commanding presence to hold the fractious alliance together, the other traitor legions began to fragment. The retreat into the Eye of Terror was not a coordinated withdrawal, but a rout. Thousands of ships fled Terra's system, many damaged beyond repair, their crews desperate to escape the vengeance of their former brothers. The Eye of Terror, that great wound in reality where the warp bled through into real space, became their only refuge. The massive warp storm had existed since the birth of Slaanesh during the fall of the Eldar Empire, creating a region where the laws of physics bent to the whims of chaos. For the fleeing traitors, it represented both salvation and damnation. The journey into the Eye proved as perilous as the battles they had fled. Ships were torn apart by warp storms, their crews driven mad by demonic visions or transformed into writhing masses of flesh and metal. Those vessels that survived found themselves in a realm where time flowed differently, where thought became reality, and where the influence of the Chaos Gods was absolute. The Eye of Terror became a prison as much as a sanctuary. While the traitors were safe from Imperial pursuit, they were also trapped in a realm that constantly sought to corrupt and change them. Among the survivors of this exodus, few suffered more than the sons of Horus. Their Gene father's complete destruction had left them spiritually broken, their identity shattered along with their Primarch's soul. Many fell into madness or despair, unable to comprehend how their perfect leader had been so thoroughly defeated. Others turned to the Chaos Gods for solace, seeking new patrons to replace the father they had lost. The legion that had once been the Emperor's spear tip, the most favored of all the Astartes, found itself rudderless and reviled even among the other traitor legions. It was in this crucible of defeat and shame that Ezekiel Abaddon began his rise to power. The first captain of the Sons of Horus had fought at Horus's side throughout the heresy, witnessing his Primarch's gradual corruption and ultimate transformation into something inhuman. Unlike many of his brothers, Abaddon did not mourn Horus's death. He despised what his Gene father had become. The proud warrior who had once inspired such loyalty had been reduced to a puppet of the dark gods, a hollow vessel for their ambitions rather than a true leader of men. Abaddon's rejection of his Primarch's legacy was not merely philosophical but visceral. He had seen how Horus's obsession with the Emperor had consumed him, how his need for paternal approval had made him vulnerable to chaos corruption. The first captain understood that to succeed where Horus had failed, he would need to forge his own path, free from the shadows of both the Emperor and the War Master. This realization marked the beginning of his transformation from loyal son to the galaxy's most feared warlord. The process of claiming leadership over the remnants of the 16th Legion was neither swift nor bloodless. Many Sons of Horus commanders believed they had equal claim to command, pointing to their own achievements during the heresy or their closer relationships with the dead Primarch. Abaddon faced challenges from veteran captains like Horus Aximand and Falcus Kibber, warriors who had served longer and fought in more campaigns than the relatively young first captain. These confrontations often ended in single combat, with Abaddon's skill at arms and ruthless determination proving decisive. The most significant challenge came from those Sons of Horus who sought to preserve their Primarch's memory and traditions. These loyalists, as Abaddon came to call them, wanted to rebuild the Legion in Horus's image, to honor his sacrifice and continue his work. Abaddon saw this as weakness, a refusal to acknowledge the reality of their situation. In a series of brutal purges, he eliminated these voices of dissent, making it clear that the old ways were dead along with their gene father. The symbolic act that cemented Abaddon's authority was his decision to rename the Legion entirely. The Sons of Horus would become the Black Legion, their sea-green armor repainted in midnight black with silver trim. This was more than a cosmetic change. It represented a complete rejection of their past identity and allegiance. Where the Sons of Horus had been defined by their relationship to their Primarch, the Black Legion would be defined by their hatred of the Imperium and their determination to see it burn. The transformation extended beyond mere symbolism. Abaddon instituted new traditions, new oaths of loyalty, and new methods of warfare. He embraced the gifts of chaos while maintaining enough independence to avoid becoming any single god's puppet. This delicate balance required constant vigilance and political maneuvering, as each of the dark gods sought to claim the rising warlord as their champion. Abaddon's solution was to accept power from all four while binding himself completely to none, a dangerous game that few mortals could survive. As the Black Legion took shape under Abaddon's leadership, he recognized that numbers alone would not be sufficient to challenge the Imperium. The other traitor legions had retreated into their own domains within the Eye of Terror, pursuing their own agendas and nursing their own grievances. The Death Guard had claimed plague worlds where Nurgle's gifts could flourish. The Thousand Sons sought arcane knowledge in crystal cities built from pure thought. The World Eaters carved paths of destruction across demon worlds, feeding Khorne's endless hunger for blood. The Emperor's children indulged in ever greater extremes of sensation and depravity in Slaanesh's name. Each legion had become increasingly specialized, their focus narrowed by their patron god's influence. This made them powerful within their specific domains, but limited their ability to wage the kind of coordinated campaign that would be necessary to threaten Terra again. Abaddon understood that victory would require unity, and unity would require compromise and political skill as much as military might. The establishment of the Ezekarian marked Abaddon's first major step toward building the coalition that would eventually threaten the Imperium. This inner circle of champions was carefully selected not just for their combat prowess, but for their ability to represent different factions within the traitor forces. Each member brought their own followers and resources, creating a web of alliances that extended Abaddon's influence far beyond the Black Legion itself. Cadia the Sorcerer represented the psychic traditions that had been largely purged from the Sons of Horus during the Great Crusade. His mastery of the warp arts proved essential for navigating the treacherous politics of the Eye of Terror, where demonic princes and chaos lords responded more to displays of supernatural power than conventional military strength. Iskandar Khayan's inclusion also sent a message to the Thousand Sons and other sorcerer-heavy warbands that the Black Legion offered a place for those whose abilities had been rejected by their original legions. Falcus Kibber, the Widowmaker, brought with him the loyalty of many veteran Terminators who had served in the Sons of Horus since before the heresy. His presence provided continuity with the Legion's martial traditions, while demonstrating that Abaddon valued experience and proven ability over political convenience. The Widowmaker's reputation for brutal efficiency in close combat made him an ideal enforcer for Abaddon's will, capable of handling challenges that required more finesse than open warfare. Igethmer the Deceiver added a different dimension to the Ezekarians' capabilities. The former word-bearer brought extensive knowledge of chaos theology and demon summoning, skills that proved invaluable when dealing with the various cults and possessed warbands that proliferated within the Eye of Terror. His defection from Lorgar's Legion also demonstrated that Abaddon's cause could attract warriors from across the spectrum of traitor forces, not just disaffected sons of Horus. The Eye of Terror itself shaped the evolution of all who dwelt within its boundaries. Time moved differently in various regions. Some worlds experienced centuries, while others knew only moments. Space folded in impossible ways, allowing fleets to traverse vast distances through warp rifts, while other expeditions became lost for millennia in temporal loops. The constant exposure to raw chaos energy mutated both flesh and spirit, creating new breeds of warrior that bore little resemblance to the Astartes who had first fled Terra. These changes were not merely physical. The traitor legions developed new cultures, new beliefs, and new methods of warfare shaped by their environment. Warbands that had once prized discipline and coordination learned to embrace the chaotic nature of their realm, using unpredictability as a weapon against their enemies. Veterans who had fought in the sterile corridors of Imperial ships found themselves battling across landscapes of living metal and crystallized screams, where the very ground might shift allegiance based on the observer's thoughts. Abaddon's transformation from first captain to the preeminent warlord of chaos did not occur overnight. The process required him to shed not only his former identity, but also the tactical doctrines and strategic thinking that had defined the Sons of Horus during the Great Crusade. Where Horus had sought rapid victory through overwhelming force and personal charisma, Abaddon recognized that the long war against the Imperium would require patience, cunning, and the gradual erosion of imperial strength across multiple fronts. The acquisition of the Talon of Horus became the defining moment in Abaddon's rise to supremacy. The weapon had been Horus's personal lightning claw, a masterwork of artifice that combined advanced imperial technology with the corrupting influence of chaos. When the Warmaster fell, the Talon had been cast into the warp storms surrounding the vengeful spirit, lost among the debris of the shattered fleet. For decades, various warlords and scavengers had sought the relic, understanding that whoever claimed it would possess a powerful symbol of legitimacy among the traitor forces. Abaddon's quest for the Talon took him deep into the most dangerous regions of the Eye of Terror. The weapon had come to rest on Malium, a demon world where reality shifted according to the whims of its inhabitants. The planet's surface was a patchwork of different environments, each reflecting the psychological state of whatever force controlled that particular region. Crystalline deserts gave way to forests of bone and sinew, while lakes of liquid metal reflected skies that burned with unnatural fire. The Talon lay within a fortress constructed from the fused remains of Imperial and traitor vessels, their hulls twisted into impossible geometries by the planet's chaotic nature. The structure was guarded by a coalition of warbands led by Drekarth the Sightless, a former World Eaters captain who had been transformed into something barely recognizable as Astartes. His body had been reshaped by centuries of exposure to the warp, with additional limbs grafted onto his torso and sensory organs that could perceive multiple dimensions simultaneously. The assault on Drekarth's stronghold demonstrated Abaddon's evolving tactical philosophy. Rather than launching a direct assault, he spent months infiltrating the various factions that served the Sightless, exploiting their rivalries and gradually turning them against each other. When he finally struck, the fortress was already weakened by internal strife, its defenders more concerned with settling personal grudges than repelling invaders. The battle for the Talon itself took place in the fortress's central chamber, where the weapon hung suspended in a cage of crystallized screams. Drekarth had bound the relic with chains forged from his own mutated flesh, believing that this would prevent anyone else from claiming it. The duel between the two champions lasted for hours, their enhanced physiology allowing them to fight with an intensity that would have killed normal humans within minutes. Drekarth's mutations gave him advantages that pure Astartes genetics could not match. His additional arms wielded weapons crafted from demon bone, while his enhanced senses allowed him to anticipate attacks from angles that should have been impossible to perceive. However, these same mutations had cost him much of his tactical thinking and strategic awareness. He fought like the berserker he had become, relying on brute force and supernatural resilience rather than the disciplined combat techniques that had made the World Eaters so feared during the Great Crusade. Abaddon's victory came not through superior strength, but through superior intellect. He recognized that Drekkarth's mutations had created vulnerabilities as well as advantages, and he exploited these systematically throughout their duel. When the Sightless finally fell, his death screams shattered the crystallized cage holding the Talon, allowing Abaddon to claim his prize. The moment Abaddon's fingers closed around the Talon's grip, he felt the weapon's machine spirit attempting to dominate his mind. The relic had been shaped by Horus's will and corrupted by his fall, containing echoes of the War Master's personality and ambitions. Lesser warriors who had attempted to wield the Talon had been consumed by these psychic impressions, becoming pale shadows of the dead Primarch rather than masters of the weapon. Abaddon's response was characteristically brutal and direct. Rather than attempting to commune with the weapon's spirit or gradually assert his dominance, he imposed his will through sheer force of personality. The psychic battle that followed left him unconscious for 3 days, but when he awakened, the Talon had been completely bound to his service. The weapon's machine spirit had not been destroyed, but rather reshaped, its loyalty transferred from the dead War Master to his former first captain. The Talon's integration with Abaddon's combat style required significant adaptation. The weapon was larger and heavier than standard lightning claws, designed for a Primarch's enhanced physiology rather than an Astartes warrior. Its energy field generators had been modified by the Mechanicum's finest artificers, creating a disruption effect that could tear through even the heaviest armor with ease. The Talon's fingers could extend into monomolecular blades capable of cutting through tank armor, while its built-in combi bolter could fire specialized ammunition blessed by the Dark Mechanicum. More importantly, the Talon served as a symbol of Abaddon's legitimacy as Horus's successor. The weapon's presence at his side convinced many wavering warbands to join his cause, while its reputation struck fear into the hearts of his enemies. Imperial intelligence reports from this period describe the psychological impact of the Talon's appearance on battlefields, noting that even veteran Space Marines showed signs of hesitation when facing Abaddon in personal combat. With the Talon secured, Abaddon began implementing his grand strategy for the Long War. He understood that the Imperium's greatest strength lay not in its military might, but in its ability to coordinate responses across vast distances. The Imperial Navy, Astra Militarum, and Space Marine chapters could reinforce threatened sectors with remarkable efficiency, bringing overwhelming force to bear against localized threats. Previous Chaos incursions had failed because they had been too predictable, allowing Imperial commanders to concentrate their defenses at obvious targets. Abaddon's solution was to embrace unpredictability and multiple simultaneous threats. Rather than launching massive invasions that would inevitably attract Imperial attention, he began orchestrating hundreds of smaller raids, rebellions, and incursions across the galaxy. Each individual threat was manageable, but their cumulative effect was to stretch Imperial resources beyond their breaking point. Sector fleets found themselves constantly redeploying to meet new emergencies, while garrison forces were gradually worn down by repeated attacks. This strategy required unprecedented cooperation between the various Chaos factions, many of whom had spent the centuries since the Heresy nursing grudges against their former allies. The Death Guard viewed the Emperor's children as decadent weaklings, while the Thousand Sons considered the World Eaters to be mindless brutes. Each traitor legion had developed its own culture and priorities during their exile, making unified action increasingly difficult to achieve. Abaddon's genius lay in his ability to navigate these complex relationships while maintaining his own independence. He refused to become the champion of any single Chaos god, recognizing that such allegiance would limit his ability to unite the disparate factions under his banner. Instead, he cultivated relationships with representatives of all four powers, accepting their gifts while avoiding the spiritual bondage that had consumed so many of his contemporaries. His dealings with Khorne required careful management of the Blood God's expectations. The Skull Throne demanded constant warfare and bloodshed, but Abaddon understood that mindless violence would not achieve his strategic objectives. He satisfied Khorne's hunger through carefully planned raids and challenges, ensuring that the Blood God's champions remained loyal while avoiding the berserker rage that had crippled the World Eaters as an effective fighting force. Nurgle's influence manifested through Abaddon's acceptance of the inevitability of decay and death. The Plague Father offered resilience and endurance, gifts that proved invaluable during the long campaigns required by Abaddon's strategy. However, he resisted Nurgle's attempts to make him embrace stagnation and despair, maintaining the drive and ambition necessary for effective leadership. Tzeentch presented perhaps the greatest challenge, as the Changer of Ways sought to manipulate Abaddon's plans for his own inscrutable purposes. The Lord of Change offered knowledge and sorcerous power, but always at the cost of agency and free will. Abaddon's solution was to accept Tzeentch's gifts through intermediaries, using sorcerers like Kayan to channel the god's power while maintaining his own spiritual independence. Slaanesh's temptations were perhaps the most subtle, offering perfection and the fulfillment of every desire. The Dark Prince sought to corrupt Abaddon through pride and ambition, promising ultimate victory in exchange for spiritual submission. Abaddon's response was to embrace his own arrogance while refusing to acknowledge Slaanesh as its source, claiming his achievements as products of his own will rather than divine favor. This delicate balancing act required constant vigilance and political maneuvering. Each of the Chaos Gods sought to claim Abaddon as their champion, sending demon princes and mortal representatives to test his resolve and offer greater rewards for exclusive allegiance. Many of these encounters ended in violence, as Abaddon made it clear that his loyalty could not be purchased or coerced. The most significant test of his independence came when the demon prince Doombreed, one of Khorne's most favored servants, challenged Abaddon's right to lead the forces of chaos. The ancient demon had been mortal during Terra's prehistory, ascending to demonhood through countless acts of violence and bloodshed. His power dwarfed that of any mortal champion, and his challenge carried the implicit backing of the Blood God himself. The confrontation took place on the demon world of Sikaris, where reality was shaped by the will of its inhabitants, and the laws of physics held little meaning. Doombreed appeared as a towering figure wreathed in brass and flame, his presence causing the very ground to crack and bleed. His voice carried the authority of ages, demanding that Abaddon kneel and acknowledge Khorne as his master. Abaddon's refusal was absolute and uncompromising. He declared that he served no master save his own will, that his war against the Imperium was motivated by hatred rather than divine mandate. The demon prince's rage at this defiance manifested as a literal firestorm, but Abaddon stood unmoved, his own fury matching that of Khorne's champion. The battle that followed demonstrated why Abaddon had chosen to remain mortal rather than accepting demonhood. Doombreed's power was immense but inflexible, bound by the nature of his ascension and the whims of his patron god. Abaddon's mortality gave him tactical flexibility and unpredictability that the demon prince could not match. When Doombreed finally fell, his defeat sent a clear message to all the Chaos Gods that their would-be Warmaster would not be controlled. This victory established Abaddon's reputation as the supreme commander of Chaos forces, but it also marked the beginning of his most challenging period. The Demon Prince's death had impressed the various factions, but it had also created a power vacuum that dozens of warlords sought to fill. Each believed they could succeed where Doombreed had failed, leading to a series of challenges that tested Abaddon's combat skills, political acumen, and strategic thinking. The process of uniting the traitor legions under a single banner required different approaches for each faction. The Death Guard respected strength and endurance, forcing Abaddon to prove his resilience through trials that would have killed normal humans. The Thousand Sons valued knowledge and cunning, requiring him to demonstrate mastery of esoteric lore and strategic thinking. The World Eaters demanded proof of his martial prowess, while the Emperor's children sought evidence of his perfectionist nature and attention to detail. Each successful alliance brought new resources and capabilities to Abaddon's growing coalition. The Death Guard provided expertise in chemical warfare and siege tactics, while the Thousand Sons offered sorcerous knowledge and psychic support. The World Eaters brought unmatched ferocity in close combat, and the Emperor's children contributed advanced weapons technology and tactical precision. However, these alliances also created new challenges and complications. Each traitor legion maintained its own agenda and priorities, requiring constant management to prevent internal conflicts from undermining the coalition's effectiveness. Abaddon's solution was to structure his forces as a confederation rather than a traditional military hierarchy, allowing each faction to maintain its identity while contributing to the overall war effort. The establishment of the Black Legion as the core of this confederation marked a fundamental shift in chaos strategy. Where previous warlords had sought to dominate through fear or divine mandate, Abaddon built his power base through pragmatic cooperation and mutual benefit. His followers served him not because they were compelled to do so, but because his leadership offered them the best chance of achieving their own goals. This approach extended beyond the traitor legions to encompass the countless renegade chapters, pirate fleets, and chaos cults that operated throughout the galaxy. Abaddon recognized that these smaller factions possessed valuable intelligence networks, logistical capabilities, and local knowledge that could not be replicated by the major legions. By incorporating them into his coalition as equal partners rather than subordinates, he gained access to resources and opportunities that had been unavailable to previous chaos leaders. The transformation of the Eye of Terror into a unified war machine under Abaddon's command created the foundation for what would become the most sustained military campaign in human history. By the early 31st millennium, the Despoiler had forged alliances with demon princes, renegade space marine chapters, and countless mortal warbands scattered throughout the warp storm. Yet for all his political maneuvering and coalition building, Abaddon understood that his ultimate authority would rest not on treaties or oaths of fealty, but on his ability to deliver tangible victories against the Imperium that had cast them all into exile. The strategic situation facing the nascent Black Legion presented both opportunities and challenges that would shape the character of the long war for millennia to come. The Imperium of the 31st millennium bore little resemblance to the dynamic, expanding civilization that had launched the Great Crusade. The Emperor's internment within the Golden Throne had created a power vacuum at the heart of imperial governance, with the newly formed High Lords of Terra struggling to maintain unity across 1,000,000 worlds. The Codex Astartes had fractured the Loyalist legions into smaller chapters, reducing their ability to respond to large-scale threats, but also making them more difficult to eliminate entirely. Most significantly, the Imperium had adopted a fundamentally defensive posture in the wake of the heresy, where once the Imperial forces had been organized around rapid expansion and conquest, they now focused on consolidation and protection of existing territory. This shift created exploitable weaknesses that Abaddon's strategic mind immediately recognized. Imperial commanders had become accustomed to fighting from prepared positions, relying on fortified worlds and established supply lines to maintain their defensive advantages. The Cadian Gate represented the most obvious and heavily defended route out of the Eye of Terror, but it was also the most strategically valuable. The stable warp routes that connected the Eye to the wider galaxy passed through this narrow corridor of space, making it the natural choke point for any major chaos incursion. Cadia itself had been transformed into a fortress world during the Great Crusade, its surface covered with defensive installations, and its population trained from birth in military disciplines. The planet's strategic importance was matched by its symbolic value. It stood as the Imperium's defiant declaration that the traitors would never again threaten Terra. Abaddon's analysis of the Cadian Gate revealed both the strengths and limitations of Imperial defensive doctrine. The fortress world was indeed formidable, protected by orbital defense platforms, void shields, and garrison forces drawn from across the sector. However, its very strength created dependencies that could be exploited. Cadia required constant resupply from across the Imperium, making its supply lines vulnerable to interdiction. The planet's massive defensive installations demanded enormous amounts of energy and maintenance, straining its industrial capacity. Most importantly, the concentration of Imperial resources at Cadia left other potential exit routes from the Eye of Terror less heavily defended. The demon sword Drachnian had become central to Abaddon's long-term strategic planning, though its acquisition would prove far more complex than claiming the Talon of Horus. The weapon was no mere relic or symbol of authority, but a demon of immense power bound within a blade of impossible sharpness. Forged during the dark age of technology from materials that existed partially outside normal space-time, Drachnian possessed the ability to cut through reality itself, making it one of the most dangerous artifacts in the galaxy. Imperial records from this period, fragmented and often contradictory, suggest that the sword had been hidden somewhere within the Imperial Palace during the final days of the heresy. The Emperor himself had bound the demon within the blade, recognizing that its power was too great to be destroyed, but too dangerous to be left uncontrolled. The weapon's exact location remained one of the Imperium's most closely guarded secrets, known only to the highest echelons of the Adeptus Custodes and perhaps the Emperor himself. Abaddon's intelligence network, built through decades of careful cultivation and strategic alliances, had identified several possible locations for the demon's sword. Fragmentary reports from renegade custodians and corrupted Imperial officials suggested that Drachnian might be hidden within the palace's deepest vaults, protected by wards that would kill anyone who approached without proper authorization. Other sources indicated that the weapon might have been moved during the reconstruction efforts following the siege, relocated to a more secure facility elsewhere in the Sol system. The challenge of acquiring Drachnian was compounded by the sword's own nature. Unlike the Talon of Horus, which was a corrupted but fundamentally technological artifact, Drachnian was a sentient entity with its own agenda and motivations. The demon bound within the blade sought freedom from its imprisonment, but it also craved the destruction and chaos that would result from its release. Any attempt to claim the weapon would require not just military force, but also the psychic strength to dominate a creature that had existed since before humanity's rise to prominence. The planning phase for what would become the first Black Crusade consumed months of careful preparation and coordination. Abaddon's strategic council, drawn from the most experienced commanders across all the traitor legions, worked to identify potential targets and develop contingency plans for multiple scenarios. The Despoiler himself insisted on personally reviewing every aspect of the operation, from fleet dispositions to supply requirements, demonstrating the meticulous attention to detail that would characterize all his future campaigns. The initial assault force assembled within the Eye of Terror represented the largest concentration of Chaos Space Marines since the Siege of Terra. The Black Legion provided the core of the expedition, with Abaddon's own company serving as the spearhead for the most critical operations. Supporting elements from the Death Guard brought expertise in siege warfare and chemical weapons, while Thousand Suns sorcerers provided psychic reconnaissance and warp-based transportation capabilities. World Eater's assault companies added close combat specialists optimized for boarding actions and urban warfare, and Emperor's Children tactical squads contributed precision weapons and advanced targeting systems. The fleet composition reflected Abaddon's understanding of the challenges he would face in Imperial space. Rather than relying solely on the massive battle barges that had dominated Heresy-era naval warfare, he assembled a more diverse force optimized for rapid deployment and sustained operations. Strike cruisers provided the backbone of the fleet, offering sufficient firepower to engage Imperial Navy vessels while maintaining the speed and maneuverability necessary for hit-and-run tactics. Escort squadrons of destroyers and frigates served as screening forces and raiding elements, capable of operating independently to disrupt Imperial supply lines and communications. The logistics of supporting such a large force outside the Eye of Terror required innovative solutions to problems that had not existed during the Great Crusade. Imperial space was now actively hostile territory, patrolled by naval squadrons and defended by fortress worlds that could call for reinforcement at a moment's notice. Traditional supply lines extending back to demon worlds within the Eye would be vulnerable to interdiction, forcing Abaddon to develop new methods of sustaining his forces during extended campaigns. The solution lay in the transformation of captured Imperial assets into forward operating bases. Rather than attempting to hold territory permanently, Abaddon's forces would seize industrial facilities, space stations, and minor worlds, strip them of useful resources, and then abandon them before Imperial reinforcements could arrive. This approach maximized the economic damage inflicted on the Imperium while minimizing the Chaos Forces' exposure to counterattack. The first probing attacks began in early 31st millennium, targeting isolated Imperial outposts and monitoring stations along the edges of the Cadian Gate. These initial raids served multiple purposes beyond their immediate tactical objectives. They provided intelligence on Imperial defensive capabilities and response times, tested the coordination between different elements of Abaddon's coalition, and began the psychological warfare campaign that would prove as important as any military victory. The Imperial response to these early incursions revealed both the strengths and weaknesses of post-heresy defensive doctrine. Local commanders reacted quickly and decisively to reports of chaos activity, deploying available forces to investigate and contain potential threats. However, the fragmentation of command authority that had resulted from the Codex Astartes reforms created coordination problems that Abaddon's forces were quick to exploit. Space Marine chapters, Imperial Navy squadrons, and Astra Militarum regiments all operated under separate command structures, making unified responses difficult to achieve. The assault on the fortress world of Cadia began not with a direct attack on the planet itself, but with a systematic campaign to isolate it from potential sources of reinforcement. Abaddon's fleet struck simultaneously at communication relays, supply convoys, and patrol squadrons throughout the sector, creating a bubble of confusion and uncertainty around the Cadian system. Imperial commanders found themselves fighting blind, unable to coordinate with neighboring sectors or call for assistance from distant fleets. The void battles that preceded the planetary assault demonstrated the evolution of chaos naval tactics since the heresy. Where the traitor fleets of Horus's time had relied primarily on overwhelming firepower and boarding actions, Abaddon's forces employed more sophisticated strategies that took advantage of their superior knowledge of warp navigation and demon-enhanced technologies. Chaos vessels would appear without warning at the edge of Imperial sensor range, deliver devastating alpha strikes against key targets, and then disappear back into the warp before defensive forces could respond effectively. The Imperial Navy's response revealed the limitations of their post-heresy tactical doctrine. Sector fleets had been organized primarily for patrol duties and anti-piracy operations, with limited experience in large-scale fleet actions against peer opponents. The standardized ship designs mandated by the Codex Astartes provided logistical advantages, but reduced tactical flexibility, making it difficult for Imperial commanders to adapt to Abaddon's unconventional strategies. The first major engagement between the opposing fleets took place at the edge of the Cadian system, where a reinforcement convoy from the Belize Corona sector encountered Abaddon's advance elements. The Imperial force consisted of 2 battle cruisers, 6 cruisers, and a dozen escort vessels, escorting a supply convoy bound for Cadia's orbital facilities. The Chaos fleet that intercepted them was smaller in total tonnage, but possessed significant advantages in mobility and firepower concentration. The battle began with the Chaos fleet emerging from the warp in a coordinated formation that allowed them to focus their fire on the Imperial convoy's escorts while avoiding engagement with the heavier warships. The Imperial commanders' attempt to maintain formation cohesion played directly into Abaddon's tactical plan, as the need to protect the supply ships prevented the Imperial vessels from using their superior speed to dictate engagement ranges. The destruction of the Imperial convoy sent shockwaves throughout the sector command structure. The loss of supplies meant that Cadia's garrison would have to rely on local production and stockpiled resources for the duration of the siege, limiting their ability to sustain prolonged defensive operations. More importantly, the ease with which Abaddon's forces had penetrated the sector's defensive perimeter demonstrated that the Imperium's post-heresy military reforms had created new vulnerabilities that the traitors were prepared to exploit. The planetary assault on Cadia itself began with orbital bombardment designed to test the world's defensive capabilities rather than achieve immediate tactical objectives. Abaddon's fleet maintained maximum range from the planet's defense platforms, using long-range weapons to probe for weaknesses in the Void Shield network and identify priority targets for future attacks. The bombardment patterns were carefully designed to force the Imperial defenders to reveal the locations of hidden installations and backup systems. The Cadian response demonstrated why the fortress world had earned its reputation as the Imperium's premier defensive installation. The planet's void shields absorbed the initial bombardment with minimal damage, while orbital defense platforms returned fire with weapons capable of threatening even the largest Chaos vessels. Ground-based missile batteries launched coordinated salvos that forced the attacking fleet to maintain constant evasive maneuvers, preventing them from establishing stable firing positions. However, Abaddon's true objective was not the immediate conquest of Cadia, but the establishment of permanent footholds in Imperial space that could support future operations. While the main fleet engaged the fortress world's defenses, smaller task forces struck at targets throughout the sector, seizing industrial facilities and establishing forward bases on worlds that lacked the resources to mount effective resistance. The pattern established during the First Black Crusade would define the character of all subsequent campaigns. Rather than seeking decisive battles that could end the war quickly, Abaddon pursued a strategy of gradual attrition designed to wear down Imperial resources and resolve over time. Each successful raid demonstrated the Imperium's inability to protect its citizens, undermining the legitimacy of Imperial rule and encouraging rebellion and heresy throughout the affected regions. The lessons learned by both sides during these early engagements would shape military doctrine for the next 10,000 years. Imperial commanders recognized that their defensive strategies were inadequate against an enemy that refused to fight conventional battles, leading to the development of new rapid response capabilities and improved inter-service coordination. The establishment of the Cadian shock troops as an elite formation capable of rapid deployment to threatened sectors represented one of the Imperium's most significant adaptations to the Chaos threat. For the forces of Chaos, the First Black Crusade demonstrated both the potential and limitations of their new strategic approach. Abaddon's coalition proved capable of achieving tactical victories and inflicting significant damage on Imperial assets, but the fundamental challenge of translating these successes into lasting strategic gains remained unresolved. The Imperium's vast resources and decentralized command structure made it remarkably resilient to localized defeats, capable of absorbing tremendous losses while maintaining overall cohesion. The strategic landscape that emerged from the First Black Crusade's aftermath presented Abaddon with both unprecedented opportunities and complex challenges that would define his approach to the subsequent campaigns. The Imperium's response to the initial assault had revealed critical weaknesses in their defensive doctrine, but it had also demonstrated their capacity for adaptation and resilience. Imperial commanders throughout the galaxy began implementing new protocols for inter-service cooperation, while the Adeptus Mechanicus accelerated production of advanced warning systems and communication relays designed to prevent the kind of coordinated surprise attacks that had characterized Abaddon's opening moves. The Despoiler's analysis of the First Crusade's outcomes led him to a fundamental shift in strategic thinking. Where the initial campaign had focused primarily on testing Imperial defenses and establishing forward operating bases, the subsequent Crusades would target specific sectors and systems with the goal of creating permanent zones of chaos influence within Imperial space. This approach required more sophisticated intelligence gathering, longer-term planning, and careful coordination between multiple independent operations occurring simultaneously across vast distances. The Second Black Crusade, launched approximately 2 centuries after the first, demonstrated this evolved strategic philosophy through its focus on the Belize Corona sector. This region of space had been selected not for its symbolic importance or immediate military value, but for its position as a critical junction in the Imperium's trade and communication networks. The sector's industrial worlds provided essential materials for the Imperial Navy's shipbuilding programs, while its location along major warp routes made it a vital link between the core worlds around Terra and the frontier regions of the Segmentum Solar. Abaddon's intelligence network had identified Black Crusade as particularly vulnerable to the kind of long-term infiltration campaign that would become his signature tactical approach. The sector's rapid industrial expansion during the post-Heresy reconstruction period had created a large population of factory workers, miners, and transport crews who lived in conditions of grinding poverty despite the wealth their labor generated. These populations provided fertile ground for chaos cults that promised relief from their suffering through devotion to the dark gods. The preliminary phase of the Second Crusade began not with fleet movements or military preparations, but with the systematic infiltration of chaos agents into key positions throughout the Black Crusade sector. Corrupted imperial officials, renegade tech priests, and hidden cultists worked for decades to establish networks of influence that extended from the sector's industrial centers to its military command structures. These operatives avoided dramatic acts of sabotage or open rebellion that might attract attention from imperial security services, instead focusing on gradual corruption of existing institutions and the recruitment of new converts to the chaos cause. The cult networks established during this phase demonstrated sophisticated understanding of imperial society and its vulnerabilities. Rather than operating as centralized organizations that could be easily detected and eliminated, the cults were structured as loose confederations of independent cells that maintained minimal contact with each other. Each cell was given specific objectives and operational parameters, but the overall coordination of their activities was managed through encrypted communications and coded messages embedded in routine commercial and administrative traffic. The industrial worlds of the Black Crusade sector proved particularly susceptible to cult infiltration due to the harsh working conditions and social inequality that characterized their societies. Factory complexes that processed raw materials for Imperial Navy shipyards employed millions of workers in conditions that bordered on slavery, with minimal safety protections and subsistence-level wages. The promise of spiritual fulfillment and eventual liberation offered by chaos cults resonated strongly with populations that had been systematically exploited by imperial authorities for generations. The cult recruitment process was carefully designed to avoid detection by imperial security services while maximizing the number of converts who could be trusted with operational responsibilities. Initial contact was typically made through seemingly innocuous social gatherings or workplace organizations that provided mutual aid and support to their members. These groups would gradually introduce religious elements into their activities, presenting chaos worship as an ancient tradition that predated imperial rule rather than as active rebellion against established authority. The transformation of recruits from desperate workers into dedicated cultists required careful psychological manipulation and gradual exposure to chaos influence. Cult leaders, many of whom were experienced operatives sent from the Eye of Terror specifically for this purpose, understood that rapid conversion attempts often resulted in psychological breakdown or detection by imperial authorities. Instead, they employed techniques developed over centuries of covert operations, slowly eroding their targets' loyalty to the Imperium while building new allegiances based on shared suffering and promised redemption. The military phase of the Second Black Crusade began when these cult networks achieved sufficient penetration of the sector's defense forces to guarantee the success of coordinated uprisings. Abaddon's timing was carefully calculated to coincide with the annual rotation of Imperial Guard regiments, a period when new units were still integrating with existing command structures, and overall defensive coordination was at its weakest. The simultaneous activation of cult cells across dozens of worlds created a cascade of crises that overwhelmed the sector's ability to respond effectively. The initial uprising on Black Crusade's primary industrial world demonstrated the effectiveness of the infiltration strategy. Cult members within the planetary defense forces had spent years identifying key installations and developing detailed plans for their seizure or destruction. When the signal for rebellion was finally given, these operatives were able to capture spaceports, communication centers, and weapons depots with minimal resistance, while their civilian counterparts launched coordinated strikes against government buildings and imperial temples. The imperial response to the uprising revealed the limitations of their counterinsurgency capabilities. Local commanders had been trained to deal with external threats and conventional military campaigns, but they lacked experience in fighting enemies who knew their defensive plans and had access to restricted facilities. The cult network's knowledge of imperial protocols and security procedures allowed them to anticipate and counter many of the standard responses, turning the defenders' own procedures against them. The arrival of Chaos Space Marine forces marked the transition from insurgency to open warfare, as Abaddon's coalition provided the heavy military assets necessary to consolidate the cult's initial gains. The Black Legion spearheaded the assault on the sector's primary naval base, using intelligence provided by corrupted Imperial officers to identify weaknesses in the facility's defenses. The base's void shields and orbital defense platforms had been designed to repel external attacks, but they proved inadequate against enemies who possessed detailed knowledge of their operational parameters and maintenance schedules. The naval battle that followed demonstrated how the combination of conventional military force and covert infiltration could multiply the effectiveness of both approaches. Chaos Fleet elements approaching the system were able to navigate directly to optimal attack positions using navigational data stolen by cult operatives, while sabotage efforts coordinated from within the base itself disabled critical defensive systems at precisely the moment when they were most needed. The capture of the naval base provided Abaddon's forces with access to Imperial shipbuilding facilities and stockpiled military supplies that dramatically enhanced their operational capabilities. More importantly, it demonstrated to other potential rebels throughout the sector that the Imperium could be defeated, encouraging additional uprisings and defections that further weakened Imperial authority. The psychological impact of seeing Imperial installations flying chaos banners proved as valuable as any military victory, undermining the morale of loyalist forces while inspiring greater boldness among cult networks on other worlds. The Third Black Crusade represented a significant escalation in both scale and ambition, as Abaddon sought to build upon the successes achieved in Belize Corona by launching a direct assault on the Cadian Gate itself. The fortress world's defenses had been significantly strengthened in the centuries following the First Crusade, with new orbital platforms, expanded garrison forces, and improved early warning systems designed to prevent the kind of surprise attacks that had characterized the earlier campaign. However, these improvements had also created new dependencies and vulnerabilities that Abaddon's intelligence network had carefully cataloged and analyzed. The preliminary bombardment of Cadia's outer defenses began with coordinated strikes against the monitoring stations and patrol bases that formed the system's early warning network. Unlike the probing attacks of the First Crusade, these assaults were designed to achieve permanent destruction of Imperial assets rather than simply testing their capabilities. Chaos Fleet elements equipped with specialized siege weapons systematically eliminated each defensive installation, working inward from the system's periphery toward the fortress world itself. The Imperial Navy's response demonstrated both the improvements made since the First Crusade and the fundamental limitations that continued to constrain their operational effectiveness. Sector fleet elements deployed more rapidly and with better coordination than had been achieved during the previous campaign, but their tactical doctrine remained focused on defensive operations that played to Abaddon's advantages. Imperial commanders continued to prioritize the protection of fixed installations over the destruction of enemy forces, allowing chaos fleets to dictate the terms of engagement and withdraw when faced with superior opposition. The siege of Cadia itself lasted for months, with both sides demonstrating the tactical innovations they had developed during the intervening centuries. The fortress world's defenders employed new defensive technologies, including improved void shields that could absorb greater amounts of punishment and automated defense systems that reduced their dependence on human operators. However, these technological advantages were offset by Abaddon's use of demon-enhanced weapons and warp-based attack methods that bypassed conventional defensive measures. The ground campaign on Cadia revealed the extent to which both sides had adapted their military doctrines based on lessons learned from previous conflicts. Imperial defenders had constructed elaborate underground fortification networks that provided protection against orbital bombardment, while maintaining the ability to coordinate defensive operations across the planet's surface. These installations were supplied through tunnels and bunker complexes that could continue functioning even if surface facilities were destroyed or captured. Abaddon's ground forces employed tactics specifically designed to counter these defensive improvements, using specialized tunnel fighting units and siege equipment optimized for underground warfare. The Black Legion's assault companies had trained extensively in the confined spaces and limited visibility conditions that characterized subterranean combat, while their supporting elements included demon engines capable of boring through solid rock and corrupted tech priests who could disable Imperial technological systems through direct interface with machine spirits. The Fourth Black Crusade marked a fundamental shift in Abaddon's strategic approach, as he abandoned the focus sector-based campaigns that had characterized the previous Crusades in favor of simultaneous operations across multiple regions of Imperial space. This distributed campaign strategy was designed to prevent the Imperium from concentrating their defensive resources against any single threat, while maximizing the cumulative damage inflicted across the galaxy. The logistical challenges of coordinating such widespread operations required unprecedented cooperation between the various Chaos factions and the development of new command and control systems capable of managing complex multi-theater campaigns. The selection of target systems for the Fourth Crusade reflected Abaddon's sophisticated understanding of Imperial strategic priorities and resource allocation. Rather than attacking the most heavily defended worlds or the most symbolically important targets, his forces struck at secondary systems whose loss would create cascading effects throughout the broader Imperial war machine. Industrial worlds that produced specialized components for Imperial Navy vessels, agricultural planets that supplied food to major population centers, and mining systems that extracted rare materials needed for advanced technologies all became primary objectives for Chaos assault forces. The campaign's opening phase demonstrated the effectiveness of this distributed approach, as Imperial commanders found themselves responding to dozens of simultaneous crises without the ability to prioritize their responses based on clear strategic logic. Each individual attack was significant enough to require serious attention and resources, but none was so obviously critical that it justified abandoning the defense of other threatened systems. This strategic paralysis allowed Abaddon's forces to achieve their objectives with minimal resistance, while Imperial fleets moved frantically between systems in response to each new emergency. The Fifth and Sixth Black Crusades represented the culmination of Abaddon's long-term strategy to weaken Imperial Navy strength through systematic destruction of their fleet bases and shipbuilding facilities. These campaigns were characterized by highly mobile operations that targeted the infrastructure supporting Imperial naval operations, rather than engaging in direct fleet-to-fleet combat. The goal was not to defeat the Imperial Navy in decisive battles, but to gradually erode their operational capabilities by destroying the facilities needed to maintain, repair, and replace their vessels. The intelligence requirements for these campaigns were enormous, as successful attacks on naval installations required detailed knowledge of their defensive capabilities, operational schedules, and strategic importance. Abaddon's spy networks had spent decades infiltrating Imperial Navy commands, corrupting officers and technical personnel who could provide the information necessary to plan effective strikes. The most valuable intelligence came from corrupted shipyard workers and maintenance technicians who had access to classified information about fleet movements and facility vulnerabilities. The assault on the Chinchair system demonstrated the effectiveness of this approach, as Chaos forces struck simultaneously at the system's primary shipyard, fleet base, and supply depots. The coordinated nature of the attack prevented Imperial defenders from concentrating their forces at any single location, while the destruction of critical infrastructure created long-term operational problems that extended far beyond the immediate tactical situation. The loss of shipbuilding capacity meant that Imperial Navy losses in subsequent engagements could not be replaced as quickly, while the destruction of supply depots forced fleet elements to operate with reduced ammunition and fuel reserves. The establishment of permanent Chaos fleet bases in contested territories represented perhaps the most significant strategic achievement of the Fifth and Sixth Crusades. Rather than simply destroying Imperial installations and withdrawing, Abaddon's forces began occupying strategic locations that could support ongoing operations against Imperial shipping and communications. These bases were carefully selected for their defensive advantages and their position along major trade routes, allowing Chaos fleets to interdict Imperial commerce while maintaining secure supply lines back to the Eye of Terror. The conversion of captured Imperial facilities into Chaos strongholds required extensive modification to accommodate the different operational requirements of traitor forces. Imperial installations had been designed around standardized equipment and procedures that reflected the Imperium's emphasis on uniformity and centralized control. Chaos forces, by contrast, operated with a diverse array of equipment types and tactical doctrines that reflected the varied origins and allegiances of the different factions within Abaddon's coalition. The technical challenges of these conversions were handled primarily by corrupted tech priests and demon-possessed machine spirits who could interface directly with Imperial technology systems. These operatives were capable of reprogramming defensive systems, modifying manufacturing equipment, and adapting logistical networks to serve Chaos requirements while maintaining operational security against Imperial reconnaissance efforts. The resulting installations combined Imperial technological sophistication with Chaos innovation, creating hybrid facilities that were often more capable than their original Imperial counterparts. The long-term impact of these campaigns extended far beyond their immediate military objectives, as they established the foundation for the sustained warfare that would characterize the Long War for the next several millennia. The permanent Chaos presence in Imperial space created ongoing security challenges that forced the Imperium to maintain substantial military forces in defensive roles rather than deploying them for offensive operations. The psychological effect of knowing that Chaos forces could strike anywhere at any time undermined civilian morale and encouraged the growth of heretical movements throughout the affected regions. The strategic paradigm that emerged from the cumulative effects of Abaddon's early crusades had fundamentally altered the balance of power between the Imperium and the forces of Chaos. By the middle of the 39th millennium, the Despoiler's coalition had evolved from a collection of vengeful exiles into a sophisticated war machine capable of sustaining multi-generational campaigns across vast distances. The lessons learned from previous engagements had been codified into new tactical doctrines that emphasized flexibility, deception, and the systematic exploitation of Imperial weaknesses. Yet for all these achievements, Abaddon recognized that his forces still lacked the decisive advantage necessary to threaten the Imperium's core territories around Terra. The Gothic sector represented an opportunity to acquire assets that could fundamentally shift the strategic balance in Chaos's favor. Unlike the industrial worlds and fleet bases that had been the primary targets of previous crusades, the Gothic sector contained artifacts of such immense power that their acquisition could provide Abaddon with weapons capable of challenging the Imperium's most heavily defended systems. The Blackstone Fortresses that drifted through the sector's void were relics of the war in heaven, constructed by the ancient Necrons during their conflict with the Catan and the Old Ones millions of years before humanity's emergence as a spacefaring species. Imperial xenoarchaeologists had spent millennia attempting to understand the true nature and capabilities of these massive constructs, but their investigations had been hampered by the fortress's alien design philosophy and the dangerous energies that permeated their hulls. What Imperial scholars did know was that the Blackstone Fortresses possessed weapon systems of unprecedented power, capable of destroying entire fleets or sterilizing planetary surfaces from ranges that exceeded conventional naval engagement distances. More intriguingly, the fortresses appeared to have been designed specifically to combat entities of immense psychic power, suggesting that their creators had faced threats similar to those posed by the Chaos gods themselves. The Gothic sector's strategic importance extended beyond the mere presence of the Blackstone Fortresses. The region served as a critical junction in the Imperium's interstellar communication network, with astropathic relay stations that facilitated contact between the core worlds and distant frontier sectors. The sector's industrial capacity was substantial, supporting both civilian commerce and military production that supplied Imperial Navy fleets throughout the Segmentum Solar. Perhaps most importantly, the Gothic sector's location placed it directly along several major warp routes that connected the Eye of Terror to other regions of the galaxy, making it an ideal staging area for future Chaos operations. Abaddon's intelligence network had spent decades infiltrating the Gothic sector's military and civilian hierarchies, building the foundation for what would become the most complex and ambitious campaign of the Long War to date. The sector's defense forces included elements from multiple Space Marine chapters, Imperial Navy battle groups, and Astra Militarum regiments, all operating under the unified command of Sector Governor Helicos Draconis. This concentration of military assets presented significant challenges for any conventional assault, but it also created opportunities for the kind of coordinated infiltration and subversion tactics that had proven so effective in previous campaigns. The preliminary phase of what would become known as the Gothic War began with the systematic corruption of key personnel within the sector's command structure. Unlike the broad-based cult recruitment efforts that had characterized earlier crusades, this operation focused on a relatively small number of high-value targets whose positions gave them access to critical intelligence and operational authority. Corrupted astropaths provided information about Imperial fleet movements and communication protocols, while compromised tech priests offered detailed technical specifications for the sector's defensive installations and the Blackstone Fortresses themselves. The recruitment process for these high-value assets required extraordinary patience and sophistication, as the individuals targeted for corruption were typically well-trained in recognizing and resisting heretical influences. Many possessed psychic abilities or augmented cognitive functions that made them naturally resistant to conventional manipulation techniques. The Chaos operatives responsible for these recruitment efforts were drawn from the most experienced and capable agents within Abaddon's intelligence apparatus, many of whom had spent centuries perfecting their understanding of Imperial psychology and institutional culture. The corruption of astropath Transcendent Viridia Castellan represented perhaps the most significant intelligence coup of the preparatory phase. Castellan held responsibility for coordinating astropathic communications across the entire Gothic sector, giving her access to military dispatches, fleet movement orders, and strategic assessments that would normally be restricted to the highest levels of Imperial command. Her gradual conversion to the Chaos cause was accomplished through a combination of psychic manipulation and carefully orchestrated personal crises that left her emotionally vulnerable to offers of supernatural assistance and guidance. The intelligence provided by Castellan and other corrupted assets revealed that the Imperial Navy's understanding of the Blackstone Fortresses was far more limited than their public statements suggested. While Imperial tech priests had succeeded in activating some of the fortress's basic systems, including their propulsion mechanisms and defensive shields, the most powerful weapon systems remained beyond their comprehension. The fortress's machine spirits, if they could be called that, operated according to principles that bore no resemblance to Imperial technology or even the demon-possessed systems used by Chaos forces. More significantly, the intelligence reports indicated that the Blackstone Fortresses possessed capabilities that the Imperium had not yet discovered or chosen not to acknowledge publicly. Deep scans of the fortress's internal structure had revealed vast chambers and mechanisms whose purpose remained completely mysterious, while energy readings suggested that the activated portions of each fortress represented only a fraction of their total potential. The implications were staggering. If the fortresses could be fully activated and controlled, they would represent weapons of such power that they could potentially challenge even the Emperor's psychic might. The strategic planning for the Gothic War required Abaddon to coordinate the largest and most diverse coalition of chaos forces assembled since the Horus Heresy. The campaign's objectives were far more complex than simple conquest or destruction, requiring specialized capabilities that no single faction within his alliance possessed. The technical expertise needed to understand and control the Blackstone Fortresses would have to come from corrupted tech priests and demon-possessed machine spirits. The naval assets required to challenge Imperial fleet supremacy in the sector would need to be drawn from across the Eye of Terror's various demon worlds and renegade strongholds. Most critically, the psychic power necessary to interface with the fortress's alien systems would require the cooperation of sorcerers from multiple traitor legions, each bringing their own traditions and techniques to bear on the problem. The Thousand Sons contingent proved particularly valuable during the planning phase, as their extensive experience with xenotech and forbidden knowledge provided insights into the possible nature of the Blackstone Fortress's control systems. Sorcerer Lord Zaraphiston, one of the few surviving members of the Legion's original Prosperine nobility, had spent millennia studying artifacts from the War in Heaven and possessed theoretical knowledge about Necron technology that exceeded even the Imperium's classified research. His analysis suggested that the fortresses might respond to psychic commands delivered in specific frequency patterns that resonated with their original programming, though he warned that any attempt to establish such contact would expose the operator to potentially lethal feedback from the alien systems. The Death Guard's contribution to the coalition reflected their expertise in siege warfare and their unique resistance to the kinds of exotic energies that permeated ancient xenotech. Plague Marines equipped with specially modified armor could operate in environments that would prove lethal to normal Astartes, while their demon engines possessed the durability necessary to interface directly with alien systems without being destroyed by incompatible energy patterns. Lord Typhus himself had expressed interest in the campaign, recognizing that the Blackstone Fortress's power could be turned against the Imperium's most heavily defended plague worlds and fortress systems. The World Eaters and Emperor's Children provided the assault specialists and precision strike capabilities that would be necessary to seize control of the fortresses once their defenses had been penetrated. The Berserker's Fury made them ideal for the kind of brutal close-quarters combat that would be required to clear the fortress's defenders from their corridors and control chambers, while the Emperor's Children's perfectionist nature ensured that critical systems would be captured intact rather than destroyed in the fighting. Both legions had also contributed significant naval assets to the campaign, including battle barges and strike cruisers that had been modified with demon-enhanced weapons systems capable of engaging Imperial Navy vessels on equal terms. The fleet that assembled in the deep void beyond the Gothic sector's borders represented the culmination of centuries of careful preparation and resource accumulation. The core of the Armada consisted of vessels from the Black Legion's own fleet, including Abaddon's flagship, the Vengeful Spirit, which had been extensively modified and expanded since its capture during the Horus Heresy. The ancient battle barge now served as both command ship and mobile fortress, its hull bristling with weapon systems that combined Imperial technology with demon-forged enhancements. The ship's cathedral-sized command deck had been transformed into a shrine to Chaos Undivided, where Abaddon could commune with representatives of all four dark gods while maintaining his spiritual independence from any single patron. Supporting the Black Legion's capital ships were squadrons of vessels contributed by allied warbands and renegade chapters from across the galaxy. The Red Corsairs had provided fast attack craft optimized for hit and run operations against Imperial supply lines, while the Alpha Legion contributed stealth ships capable of infiltrating Imperial space undetected. Several demon princes had manifested their own vessels from the raw stuff of the warp, creating ships that defied conventional understanding of physics and engineering, but possessed capabilities that no mortal-built craft could match. The preliminary operations began with coordinated strikes against the Gothic sector's outer monitoring stations and patrol bases, designed to create blind spots in the Imperial early warning network through which the main Chaos fleet could approach undetected. These attacks were carried out by advance elements operating independently of the main force, using small, fast vessels that could strike without warning and withdraw before Imperial reinforcements could respond. The pattern of attacks was carefully designed to appear random and uncoordinated, concealing the true scope and objectives of the coming campaign from Imperial intelligence analysts. The destruction of the Lysander monitoring station demonstrated the sophistication of these preliminary operations. The facility was protected by void shields and automated defense systems that should have been sufficient to repel raiders, but Chaos infiltrators had spent months studying its operational patterns and identifying vulnerabilities. The actual assault lasted less than an hour, with boarding parties seizing control of critical systems, while external forces eliminated the station's escort vessels and communication arrays. By the time Imperial reinforcements arrived, the station had been completely destroyed, and its attackers had vanished back into the void. The Imperial Navy's response to these early attacks revealed both improvements in their tactical coordination since previous Chaos incursions and fundamental limitations that Abaddon's forces were prepared to exploit. Sector fleet elements deployed more rapidly and with better intelligence than had been achieved during earlier campaigns, but their operational doctrine remained focused on protecting fixed installations rather than hunting down and destroying enemy forces. This defensive mindset allowed Chaos raiders to choose their targets and engagement conditions, striking where Imperial forces were weakest while avoiding confrontations with superior enemy concentrations. Admiral Cornelius Ravensburg, commander of Battle Fleet Gothic, recognized the strategic implications of the raiding pattern and attempted to implement more aggressive patrol schedules designed to intercept Chaos forces before they could reach their targets. However, his efforts were hampered by the sector's vast size and the limited number of vessels available for patrol duties. The Imperial Navy's post-Heresy organizational structure, which emphasized defensive operations and sector-based command authority, proved inadequate for the kind of mobile warfare that Abaddon's forces were conducting. The first major fleet engagement of the Gothic War occurred when a Chaos squadron attempting to raid the naval base at Stranavar encountered an Imperial patrol force led by the battle cruiser Dominator. The Imperial vessels had been conducting a routine sweep of the system's outer reaches when their auger arrays detected the distinctive energy signatures of ships emerging from warp space at the edge of sensor range. Captain Liet and Semper's decision to engage immediately rather than calling for reinforcements reflected the aggressive tactical philosophy that Admiral Ravensburg had been attempting to instill throughout his command. The battle that followed demonstrated the evolution of Chaos naval tactics since the early Black Crusades. The Chaos Squadron, led by the strike cruiser Merciless Death, employed coordinated maneuvers that maximized their firepower advantage while minimizing their exposure to Imperial weapons. Rather than engaging in the kind of close-range slugging match that had characterized Heresy-era naval combat, the Chaos vessels maintained optimal firing distances and used their superior speed to dictate the terms of engagement. The Imperial ships' attempts to close to boarding range were consistently frustrated by precise maneuvering that kept them at disadvantageous positions throughout the battle. The Dominator's destruction sent shockwaves through the Imperial command structure, not because of the strategic significance of the loss, but because of the tactical superiority that the Chaos forces had demonstrated. Imperial Navy doctrine had assumed that their vessels possessed technological and training advantages that would allow them to defeat Chaos forces of equivalent size, but the engagement at Stranavar had proven this assumption false. The Chaos Squadron had not only won decisively, but had done so while suffering minimal damage, suggesting that they possessed capabilities that Imperial intelligence had failed to identify or properly assess. The main phase of the Gothic War began when Abaddon's fleet emerged from the warp at multiple points throughout the sector simultaneously, creating a crisis that overwhelmed the Imperial defenders' ability to respond effectively. The Chaos Armada had been divided into several task forces, each assigned specific objectives that would contribute to the overall campaign goals, while forcing Imperial commanders to divide their attention and resources among multiple threats. The largest task force, under Abaddon's direct command, moved immediately toward the Blackstone Fortress designated Talon of Horus by Imperial records, while smaller forces struck at fleet bases, industrial centers, and communication hubs throughout the sector. The assault on the Blackstone Fortress represented the culmination of centuries of preparation and the application of knowledge that had been gathered through extensive intelligence operations and xenoarchaeological research. The fortress itself was a structure of impossible size and complexity, its hull measuring over 20 kilometers in length and bristling with weapon systems that operated according to principles that defied Imperial understanding. The fortress's void shields were more powerful than those protecting entire star systems, while its main weapon could allegedly destroy planets or cripple the largest Imperial Navy vessels with a single shot. The Imperial garrison aboard the fortress consisted of tech priests, naval personnel, and a company of Imperial fists who had been assigned to study and protect the ancient construct. These defenders were well trained and equipped with the finest weapons and armor that the Imperium could provide, but they were completely unprepared for the kind of assault that Abaddon's forces launched against them. The attack began not with conventional boarding actions or external bombardment, but with psychic infiltration attempts designed to establish contact with the fortress's alien control systems. The strategic significance of Cadia extends far beyond its role as a mere fortress world, representing instead the Imperium's most critical choke point in their eternal struggle against the forces of chaos. The planet's unique position at the mouth of the Eye of Terror places it directly astride the most stable warp routes leading from that cursed realm into Imperial space. While other passages exist through the roiling warp storms that surround the Eye, these alternate routes are treacherous, unpredictable, and often impassable for extended periods. Cadia's location makes it the primary gateway through which any major chaos incursion must pass, earning it the designation as the linchpin of Imperial defense against the Long War. The planet's geological structure contributes significantly to its strategic value, as Cadia sits within a region of space where the barrier between the materium and the immaterium remains unusually thin. This phenomenon, known to Imperial scholars as the Cadian Gate, creates a corridor of relatively stable warp space that extends from the Eye of Terror toward the core systems of the Imperium. The unique properties of this region allow for more reliable warp navigation than would normally be possible so close to a major warp storm, making it an invaluable asset for both Imperial and Chaos forces seeking to move large fleets across interstellar distances. The Imperial Navy's understanding of the Cadian Gate's navigational properties has evolved significantly since the aftermath of the Horus Heresy. Early attempts to chart the region's warp currents resulted in numerous lost expeditions and corrupted navigator houses, as the proximity to the Eye of Terror exposed crews to levels of chaos influence that standard Imperial protective measures could not adequately counter. The development of specialized navigation techniques and enhanced psychic shielding required centuries of trial and error, with each improvement purchased at the cost of ships and lives lost to the warp's malevolent influence. The fortress world itself bears the scars of 10 millennia of constant warfare, its surface transformed into a vast military installation that encompasses entire continents. Massive defensive walls stretch across Cadia's primary landmasses, their ferrocrete and adamantium construction reinforced with void shield generators and automated weapon systems that can engage targets in both atmospheric and orbital environments. These fortifications are not merely static defensive positions, but rather integrated components of a planetary defense network that can coordinate responses to threats across multiple theaters simultaneously. The evolution of Cadian military doctrine reflects the planet's unique position as the Imperium's primary bulwark against chaos incursions. Unlike standard Imperial Guard regiments that are trained for deployment across diverse environments and enemy types, Cadian forces have been optimized specifically for combat against the servants of the Dark Gods. This specialization extends beyond mere tactical training to encompass psychological conditioning, equipment modifications, and organizational structures that maximize effectiveness against Chaos Space Marines, demon engines, and corrupted Imperial assets. The legendary Cadian shock troops emerged from this crucible of constant warfare as perhaps the finest conventional military force in the Imperial arsenal. These regiments combine the discipline and training standards of elite Imperial Guard formations with specialized knowledge and experience that can only be gained through generations of combat against chaos forces. Cadian officers study detailed tactical analyses of every Black Crusade, learning to recognize the signature strategies and weaknesses of individual traitor legions and demon princes. Their enlisted personnel train with weapons and equipment specifically designed to penetrate Chaos Space Marine armor, while their support units master techniques for countering demon engines and possessed vehicles. The recruitment and training processes for Cadian shock troops reflect the planet's militarized culture, where every citizen is expected to contribute to the world's defense regardless of their primary occupation. Children begin basic military training as soon as they can walk, learning weapon handling, tactical movement, and enemy identification alongside traditional academic subjects. By adolescence, most Cadians possess combat skills that would qualify them as veterans in less militarized Imperial worlds, while those selected for formal military service undergo additional years of specialized training that transforms them into some of the Imperium's most capable soldiers. The Cadian Military Academy system produces officers who combine traditional Imperial Guard tactical doctrine with innovations developed specifically for anti-chaos warfare. These institutions maintain extensive libraries of tactical data gathered from previous Black Crusades, including detailed analyses of Chaos Space Marine combat capabilities, demon summoning techniques, and the operational patterns of major traitor legion commanders. Cadian officers are trained to think like their enemies, studying chaos tactical philosophy and strategic objectives to better anticipate and counter their moves. The planet's industrial capacity has been entirely subordinated to military requirements, with massive manufactorums producing the specialized equipment needed to outfit forces fighting against chaos corruption. Cadian pattern lasguns incorporate blessed components and sanctified power cells that provide enhanced effectiveness against demonic entities, while their armor systems include integrated auspex scanners designed to detect psychic emanations and warp-based distortions. The planet's tech priests have developed unique variants of standard Imperial equipment, creating weapons and vehicles optimized for the specific challenges of fighting enemies who can corrupt machine spirits and subvert technological systems. The network of fortress worlds that comprises the broader Cadian Gate defense system extends far beyond Cadia itself, encompassing dozens of heavily fortified planets and strategic installations throughout the region. Each of these worlds serves a specific role within the overall defensive strategy, from early warning stations positioned at the edge of the Eye of Terror's influence to massive supply depots that can sustain prolonged sieges. The coordination between these installations requires sophisticated communication networks and standardized operational procedures that allow for rapid response to emerging threats. Kasser-Haln represents one of the most significant secondary fortress worlds in the Cadian system, its surface covered with underground bunker complexes and hidden weapon emplacements that can support the primary world's defenses while serving as a fallback position if Cadia itself falls under siege. The planet's subterranean cities house millions of civilians who work in armament factories and support facilities, their lives dedicated to maintaining the war machine that keeps the Cadian Gate secure. The world's defensive installations include some of the most advanced void shield generators in the Imperium, capable of protecting entire continents from orbital bombardment. The orbital defense platforms surrounding Cadia and its sister worlds represent marvels of Imperial engineering, combining massive weapon systems with sophisticated sensor arrays and communication equipment. These installations serve as both offensive platforms capable of engaging Chaos fleets at extreme ranges and defensive bastions that can coordinate planetary shield networks and fighter squadrons. The largest platforms mount Nova cannons and other strategic-grade weapons normally found only on the most powerful Imperial Navy vessels, giving them the firepower to threaten even Chaos battle barges and grand cruisers. The Imperial Navy bases throughout the Cadian system maintain permanent battle groups specifically tasked with defending the gate against Chaos incursions. These fleets include some of the Imperium's most experienced and well-equipped vessels, crewed by sailors who have spent their entire careers fighting against the forces of the Long War. The naval commanders assigned to Cadian defense duties are selected not only for their tactical acumen, but also for their psychological resilience and resistance to Chaos corruption, as prolonged exposure to the Eye of Terror's influence can gradually erode even the strongest Imperial loyalties. The civilian population of Cadia plays an integral role in the planet's defensive capabilities, with every citizen trained in basic combat techniques and assigned specific roles within the overall military structure. Civilian militia units can be activated within hours of an invasion alert, providing additional manpower for defensive operations while freeing regular military units for offensive actions. The planet's cities are designed as fortress complexes, with reinforced buildings, underground tunnel networks, and integrated weapon systems that allow civilian populations to continue fighting even if military forces are overwhelmed. The cultural impact of living under constant threat of Chaos invasion has shaped Cadian society in profound ways, creating a civilization where military service is not merely an obligation, but the highest form of civic duty. Cadian literature, art, and music all reflect themes of sacrifice, duty, and resistance against the forces of darkness, while religious observances focus heavily on the Emperor's role as humanity's protector against Chaos corruption. The planet's educational system emphasizes not only academic achievement, but also moral fortitude and spiritual resilience, recognizing that the greatest threat posed by Chaos forces lies not in their physical weapons, but in their ability to corrupt and subvert human souls. The psychological conditioning required to maintain effective resistance against Chaos influence extends throughout all levels of Cadian society. Citizens undergo regular spiritual purification rituals conducted by the ecclesiarchy, while suspected cases of corruption are investigated by specially trained commissars who possess the authority to conduct summary executions if necessary. The planet's medical facilities include specialized treatment centers for soldiers and civilians who have been exposed to warp energies or demonic influences, though recovery rates remain discouragingly low despite centuries of research and development. The economic structure of Cadian society reflects the planet's total commitment to military preparedness, with virtually every aspect of civilian life organized around supporting the war effort. Agricultural production focuses on crops that can be stored for extended periods and processed into field rations suitable for military consumption. Manufacturing centers prioritize the production of weapons, ammunition, and military equipment over civilian goods, while transportation networks are designed to facilitate rapid military deployment rather than commercial efficiency. The integration of civilian and military command structures on Cadia creates a unique form of governance where planetary administrators must possess both political acumen and military expertise. The world's ruling council includes representatives from major military commands, industrial cartels, and civilian population centers, but ultimate authority rests with the planetary commander, who typically holds the rank of Lord General or higher. This individual serves not only as the supreme military commander, but also as the political leader responsible for maintaining civilian morale and coordinating with imperial authorities throughout the sector. The constant state of military readiness maintained on Cadia requires enormous resources and creates significant strain on both equipment and personnel. Military units must maintain peak combat effectiveness while simultaneously conducting training exercises, infrastructure maintenance, and civilian support operations. The planet's logistics networks operate under the assumption that major supply lines could be cut at any time, requiring extensive stockpiling of critical materials and the development of self-sufficient production capabilities that can continue functioning even under siege conditions. The defensive preparations that had transformed Cadia into the Imperium's premier fortress world were matched by equally sophisticated developments in the war machines and military formations that served Abaddon's growing coalition. The centuries of warfare that followed the initial Black Crusades had provided ample opportunity for the forces of chaos to refine their own military doctrines, develop new technologies, and create weapons systems specifically designed to counter imperial defensive advantages. The Eye of Terror's unique properties as a realm where the laws of physics bent to the will of consciousness had enabled innovations that would have been impossible within normal space, giving birth to war machines that combined advanced technology with demonic essence in ways that defied imperial understanding. The demon engines that formed the backbone of Chaos armored divisions represented perhaps the most significant tactical innovation to emerge from the Long War's early phases. These constructs merged the mechanical precision of imperial technology with the raw power and malevolent intelligence of warp entities, creating vehicles that possessed capabilities far exceeding their purely technological counterparts. Unlike imperial tanks that relied on machine spirits bound within their systems, demon engines housed actual demons whose consciousness had been permanently fused with the vehicle's structure, allowing for levels of coordination and tactical flexibility that no conventional crew could achieve. The Defiler, one of the most common and feared demon engine designs, exemplified the terrifying effectiveness of this fusion between technology and warp entity. Standing nearly 4 times the height of a standard Imperial battle tank, these spider-like constructs moved across battlefields with an unnatural grace that belied their massive size. Their crab-like legs could traverse terrain that would immobilize conventional vehicles, while their multiple weapon systems provided devastating firepower against both infantry and armored targets. The demon bound within each Defiler possessed an intelligence and cunning that allowed it to identify tactical opportunities and exploit enemy weaknesses with a sophistication that no programmed system could match. The construction of demon engines required resources and expertise that existed only within the Eye of Terror's demon forges, massive industrial complexes where corrupted tech priests worked alongside demon smiths to create weapons that transcended the boundaries between the material and immaterial realms. These facilities operated according to principles that bore little resemblance to imperial manufacturing processes, using techniques that involved ritual summoning, psychic manipulation, and the deliberate corruption of machine spirits. The Dark Mechanicus adepts who oversaw these operations had abandoned the Omnissiah's teachings in favor of darker gods who promised power without the limitations imposed by conventional understanding of technology. Warpsmiths, the twisted equivalents of Imperial tech marines, served as the primary architects of demon engine development and maintenance. These corrupted space marines had undergone extensive modification that replaced portions of their bodies with demonic mechanisms, allowing them to interface directly with warp touch technology in ways that would prove fatal to unprotected individuals. Their understanding of both Imperial and Chaos technology made them invaluable assets for any warband seeking to maintain complex equipment in the hostile environment of the Eye of Terror, where conventional repair techniques often proved inadequate against the corrosive effects of constant warp exposure. The Forgefiend represented another evolution in demon engine design, optimized specifically for anti-armor warfare against Imperial tank formations. These quadrupedal constructs mounted twin ectoplasma cannons that could fire streams of superheated warp energy capable of melting through the heaviest Imperial armor plating. The demon bound within each Forgefiend possessed an instinctive understanding of metallurgy and structural engineering that allowed it to identify weak points in enemy vehicles with supernatural precision, directing its fire to achieve maximum damage with minimal ammunition expenditure. The tactical deployment of demon engines required careful coordination with conventional chaos forces, as their unpredictable nature and supernatural abilities could prove as dangerous to allies as to enemies. The demons bound within these constructs retain their otherworldly perspectives and motivations, requiring constant management by experienced commanders who understood how to channel their destructive impulses toward appropriate targets. Warband leaders who attempted to treat demon engines as simple vehicles often found their formations disrupted by constructs that pursued their own agendas rather than following tactical orders. The diversification of Chaos Space Marine warbands had accelerated significantly during the Long War's middle period, as the original Traitor Legions fragmented into smaller, more specialized formations that reflected the varied influences of their patron gods and the unique challenges of surviving within the Eye of Terror. These warbands developed distinct tactical doctrines that maximized their particular strengths while adapting to the resources and opportunities available within their chosen territories. The result was a proliferation of military formations that shared common origins, but employed radically different approaches to warfare. World Eater's warbands exemplified the complete transformation that Khorne's influence could impose upon Space Marine formations. The surgical implantation of Butcher's nails into their craniums had fundamentally altered their neurological structure, replacing tactical thinking and strategic planning with an overwhelming compulsion toward violence and bloodshed. These berserkers fought with a fury that transcended normal human limitations, their enhanced physiology allowing them to continue fighting even after sustaining injuries that would incapacitate normal Astartes. Their red and brass armor bore the scars of countless battles, while their weapons were often modified with chainsaw attachments, serrated edges, and other enhancements designed to maximize the carnage they could inflict in close combat. The tactical deployment of World Eaters required commanders who understood that these warriors could not be controlled in the conventional sense, but rather directed toward appropriate targets and allowed to pursue their violent impulses. Successful World Eaters assaults typically involved identifying the strongest enemy formations and launching berserker charges that relied on speed and ferocity to overcome defensive advantages. The psychological impact of facing warriors who showed no fear of death and seemed to grow stronger as they sustained injuries proved devastating to Imperial morale, often causing entire formations to break and flee rather than engage in close combat. Khorne the Betrayer had emerged as the most infamous champion of the World Eaters, his reputation for violence and treachery extending far beyond his own legion to encompass all the forces of chaos. His presence on a battlefield guaranteed that the fighting would escalate to levels of brutality that exceeded even the normal standards of the Long War, as his bloodthirsty example inspired other warriors to greater acts of violence, while his tactical acumen ensured that this fury was directed towards strategically valuable objectives. The weapon he carried, Gorechild, had been modified with demon-forged components that allowed it to cut through even Terminator armor with ease. Thousand Sons warbands represented the opposite extreme of Chaos Space Marine evolution, their focus on sorcery and psychic warfare creating formations that bore little resemblance to conventional military units. The rubric of Ahriman had transformed many of these warriors into rubric Marines, animated suits of armor inhabited by the dust of their former occupants and controlled by the psychic will of surviving sorcerers. These constructs possessed perfect discipline and unwavering loyalty, but they lacked the initiative and adaptability that characterized living warriors, requiring constant direction from their sorcerer commanders. The sorcerers who led Thousand Sons warbands were among the most powerful psychers outside the Emperor himself, their centuries of study and practice having granted them mastery over forces that could reshape reality according to their will. These warriors could summon demons from the warp, manipulate time and space to confuse enemy targeting systems, and unleash psychic attacks that could destroy entire squads of enemy soldiers. Their understanding of forbidden knowledge made them invaluable allies for other chaos forces, as they could provide intelligence about enemy movements through divination, create psychic barriers that protected against Imperial psychic attacks, and identify weaknesses in enemy defenses that would not be apparent to conventional reconnaissance. The tactical doctrine employed by Thousand Suns formations emphasized precision and overwhelming psychic firepower, rather than the brute force approaches favored by other traitor legions. Their sorcerers would typically establish positions that maximize their psychic range while providing protection against enemy counterattacks, then coordinate devastating barrages of warp energy that could eliminate key enemy units or destroy critical infrastructure. The Rubric Marines served as both bodyguards and weapons platforms, their Inferno bolters providing sustained fire support, while their enhanced durability allowed them to hold positions against enemy assaults. Magnus, the Red's influence over his scattered sons, remained strong despite his ascension to demon princehood, his psychic presence providing guidance and coordination that transcended normal command structures. The Crimson King's vast intellect and millennia of accumulated knowledge made him an invaluable strategic asset for Abaddon's coalition, as he could provide insights into Imperial capabilities and vulnerabilities that no purely mortal commander could possess. His personal appearances on battlefields were rare but devastating, his psychic powers capable of destroying entire Imperial formations or corrupting enemy psychers to serve chaos interests. Emperor's Children warbands had evolved into formations that pursued perfection through excess, their obsession with sensation and experience driving them to develop increasingly exotic weapons and tactics. These warriors had modified their bodies and equipment in pursuit of new forms of stimulation, creating combinations of enhanced senses, drug dispensers, and sonic weapons that allowed them to experience combat as a form of artistic expression. Their power armor incorporated systems that amplified every sensation, from the impact of enemy fire to the vibrations of their own weapons, transforming warfare into an overwhelming sensory experience. The sonic weapons, favored by Emperor's Children formations, represented some of the most innovative technology to emerge from the eye of Terror's demon forges. These devices could generate sound waves at frequencies that disrupted molecular bonds, causing enemy armor to crack and fragment under acoustic assault. More sophisticated versions could target specific frequencies that resonated with human nervous systems, causing paralysis, hallucinations, or complete sensory overload that left victims helpless against follow-up attacks. The psychological impact of these weapons extended beyond their immediate targets, as the horrific sounds they produced could demoralize entire enemy formations. Noise Marines, the elite specialists of Emperor's Children warbands, had undergone extensive surgical modification to enhance their ability to perceive and generate sonic attacks. Their helmets incorporated advanced acoustic equipment that allowed them to analyze enemy positions through sound reflection while protecting their own hearing from the devastating effects of their weapons. These warriors fought with a combination of artistic flair and tactical precision that reflected their patron god's emphasis on perfection through excess, seeking to create battles that were simultaneously effective military operations and aesthetic masterpieces. The integration of mortal forces into chaos military formations had become increasingly sophisticated as the Long War progressed, with corrupted Imperial Guard regiments and planetary defense forces providing essential capabilities that Space Marine formations could not replicate. These units brought expertise in logistics, artillery support, and mass infantry tactics that complemented the elite capabilities of Chaos Space Marines while providing the numerical strength necessary for large-scale operations. The corruption of entire Imperial military formations required extensive infiltration efforts and careful psychological manipulation, but the results provided Chaos commanders with assets that retained much of their original training and equipment while serving new masters. Renegade Imperial Guard regiments that had turned to Chaos often retained their original organizational structures and tactical doctrines, making them particularly effective against loyalist forces who expected to face conventional enemy formations. These units possessed detailed knowledge of Imperial military procedures, communication protocols, and standard operating procedures that allowed them to anticipate and counter Imperial responses with devastating effectiveness. Their familiarity with Imperial equipment and tactics made them ideal for infiltration operations and false flag attacks that could sow confusion and mistrust within Imperial command structures. The Lost and the Damned, as these mortal Chaos forces came to be known, included not only corrupted Imperial military units, but also the countless cultists, mutants, and heretics who served the dark gods throughout the galaxy. These forces provided the mass infantry formations necessary for large-scale assaults while serving as expendable troops that could absorb enemy fire and occupy defensive positions. Their fanatical devotion to Chaos made them fearless in combat, willing to accept casualties that would break the morale of conventional forces while continuing to advance toward their objectives. Chaos cultists drawn from Imperial civilian populations brought unique capabilities that reflected their original occupations and social positions. Former factory workers possessed technical skills that made them valuable for sabotage operations and equipment maintenance, while corrupted administrators could provide intelligence about Imperial bureaucratic procedures and security protocols. The diversity of backgrounds represented within cult formations allowed Chaos commanders to assemble specialized units optimized for specific mission requirements, from assassination teams composed of former enforcers to reconnaissance elements led by corrupted astropaths. The summoning and binding of demonic allies represented perhaps the most significant force multiplier available to Chaos commanders, providing access to entities whose capabilities transcended the limitations of purely material forces. These warp creatures could manifest abilities that violated physical laws, moving through solid barriers, manipulating probability, and wielding energies that no conventional weapon could duplicate. However, the integration of demonic forces into military operations required extensive preparation and carried significant risks, as the entities summoned from the warp possessed their own agendas and could prove as dangerous to their summoners as to their intended targets. Greater demons served as living siege engines whose power could rival that of Titan war machines, while providing capabilities that no purely technological construct could match. A bloodthirster of Khorne could carve through enemy formations with its massive axe, while inspiring nearby Chaos forces to greater acts of violence, its presence on the battlefield serving as both a tactical asset and a psychological weapon. The demon's supernatural resilience allowed it to absorb punishment that would destroy conventional vehicles, while its ability to fly provided mobility advantages that could be exploited to strike at enemy weak points or bypass defensive positions entirely. The summoning rituals required to manifest greater demons demanded extensive preparation and significant sacrifices, often requiring the deaths of hundreds or thousands of captives to provide the psychic energy necessary for materialization. The process was inherently dangerous, as any failure in the binding rituals could result in the demon turning against its summoners or manifesting in ways that served its own purposes rather than military objectives. Successful summonings required the cooperation of multiple powerful sorcerers working in careful coordination. Their combined will sufficient to impose temporary control over entities whose power dwarfed that of any mortal being. The tactical employment of greater demons required commanders who understood both their capabilities and limitations, as these entities operated according to supernatural logic that often conflicted with conventional military thinking. A Lord of Change might provide devastating psychic support and strategic intelligence, but its tendency to pursue complex schemes that served Tzeentch's long-term goals could disrupt immediate tactical plans. Similarly, a great unclean one could serve as a nearly indestructible anchor for defensive operations, but its spreading plagues might affect friendly forces as readily as enemies. Lesser demons provided more manageable assets that could be integrated into conventional military formations with less risk of uncontrolled consequences. Bloodletters could serve as elite assault troops whose supernatural weapons could penetrate any armor, while plaguebearers provided resilient infantry that could hold defensive positions against overwhelming odds. These entities retained the supernatural advantages of their demonic nature, while being subject to more reliable command and control, making them valuable supplements to mortal forces in situations where conventional capabilities proved insufficient. The development of demon weapons had created a new category of armament that combined the reliability of Imperial technology with the supernatural power of warp entities. These weapons housed demons bound within their mechanisms, providing enhanced capabilities that exceeded anything achievable through purely technological means. A demon sword might cut through molecular bonds with supernatural sharpness, while providing its wielder with enhanced reflexes and combat instincts, though the constant presence of a malevolent entity within the weapon created psychological stresses that could eventually consume the user's sanity. The strategic momentum generated by the Gothic War's conclusion had fundamentally altered the balance of power between the Imperium and Abaddon's coalition, creating opportunities that the Despoiler was quick to exploit. The capture of 2 Blackstone Fortresses provided Chaos forces with weapons of unprecedented destructive capability, while the intelligence gathered during the campaign revealed critical weaknesses in Imperial defensive doctrine that could be systematically exploited across multiple sectors. The 7th Black Crusade represented the first major test of these new capabilities, as Abaddon sought to penetrate deeper into Imperial space than any previous campaign had achieved. The target selection for the 7th Crusade reflected Abaddon's evolving understanding of Imperial strategic priorities and resource allocation patterns. Rather than focusing on heavily defended fortress worlds or symbolically important systems, his forces struck at the industrial and logistical networks that sustained Imperial military operations across entire sectors. The campaign's primary objectives included the destruction of major shipyards, the disruption of supply lines connecting core worlds to frontier regions, and the systematic elimination of astropathic relay stations that facilitated long-range Imperial communications. The Agrippina sector emerged as the primary theater of operations due to its critical role in supplying Imperial Navy fleets throughout the Segmentum Solar. The region's forge worlds produced specialized components for battleship construction, while its industrial complexes manufactured the ammunition, fuel, and spare parts needed to maintain fleet operations across vast distances. The sector's strategic importance was enhanced by its position along major trade routes that connected the core worlds around Terra to resource-rich systems in the galactic east, making it a vital link in the Imperium's economic infrastructure. The preliminary phase of the 7th Crusade began with coordinated strikes against the sector's outer monitoring stations and communication relays, creating blind spots in the Imperial early warning network that allowed Chaos forces to approach their primary targets undetected. These attacks were carried out by fast raider squadrons, equipped with specialized jamming equipment and stealth technologies developed from captured Imperial Navy assets. The raiders' ability to disable Imperial sensors without triggering automatic distress signals provided crucial tactical advantages during the campaign's opening moves. The assault on the Lucius Forge world demonstrated the tactical innovations that Abaddon's forces had developed since the Gothic War. Rather than launching direct attacks against the planet's heavily defended industrial complexes, Chaos infiltrators had spent months identifying and corrupting key personnel within the Forge world's tech priest hierarchy. These corrupted adepts provided detailed intelligence about defensive systems, production schedules, and security protocols, while gradually introducing subtle sabotage that would cripple critical systems at predetermined moments. The planetary invasion began when corrupted tech priests simultaneously disabled void shield generators, communication arrays, and automated defense systems across multiple industrial complexes. The coordinated nature of these failures created confusion within the Imperial command structure, as defenders struggled to understand how their most secure installations could suffer simultaneous system failures without any apparent external cause. The Chaos ground forces that landed during this period of confusion found themselves facing disorganized resistance from defenders who lacked effective communication and fire support. The Skitarii legions defending Lucius fought with their characteristic mechanical precision, but their reliance on integrated command systems proved to be a critical vulnerability when those systems had been compromised by corrupted tech priests. Individual Skitarii units continued to function effectively within their immediate operational areas, but the loss of higher-level coordination prevented them from mounting the kind of coordinated defense that might have repelled the invasion. The Forge World's fall within 72 hours of the initial landing sent shockwaves throughout the sector's remaining defenders. The capture of Lucius provided Abaddon's forces with access to advanced Imperial manufacturing capabilities and technical knowledge that would prove invaluable for future operations. The Forge World's data archives contained detailed specifications for Imperial Navy vessels, weapon systems, and defensive installations that could be used to develop more effective countermeasures. More immediately, the planet's production facilities could be converted to manufacture equipment for Chaos forces, providing a sustainable source of advanced weaponry and vehicles within Imperial space itself. The Eighth Black Crusade marked a significant shift in Abaddon's strategic approach, as he began focusing on the establishment of permanent Chaos strongholds within Imperial territory, rather than conducting hit-and-run raids that achieved tactical victories but failed to secure lasting strategic advantages. This new approach required more sophisticated logistical planning and the development of defensive capabilities that could withstand Imperial counterattacks while maintaining offensive operations against nearby systems. The selection of target worlds for permanent occupation required careful analysis of their defensive capabilities, strategic value, and potential for long-term sustainability. Abaddon's intelligence network identified systems that possessed strong industrial bases but relatively weak military defenses, often worlds that had been classified as low-priority targets by Imperial strategic planners due to their distance from major threat vectors. These systems typically maintained only modest garrison forces and relied on their obscurity for protection, making them vulnerable to the kind of coordinated assault that Chaos forces could deliver. The corruption of Imperial institutions from within became a central component of the Eighth Crusade's methodology, as Abaddon recognized that military conquest alone was insufficient to maintain long-term control over captured territories. The systematic infiltration of planetary governments, military commands, and religious hierarchies required decades of patient work by skilled operatives who could gradually subvert Imperial authority while avoiding detection by security services. These infiltration efforts were coordinated by Alpha Legion specialists, whose expertise in covert operations proved invaluable for establishing the networks of influence needed to support permanent Chaos occupation. The world of Mordian Iron Guard recruitment centers became a primary target for institutional corruption, as the planet's role in training and equipping Imperial Guard regiments made it a high-value asset for Chaos forces seeking to disrupt Imperial military capabilities. Corrupted instructors gradually introduced subtle modifications to training programs, emphasizing tactics and doctrines that would prove less effective against Chaos forces while maintaining the appearance of orthodox Imperial military education. These modifications were implemented so gradually that they avoided detection by quality control inspections, creating entire generations of Imperial Guard officers whose tactical training contained deliberate weaknesses. The establishment of Chaos cult networks within Imperial civilian populations required different techniques than the corruption of military or governmental institutions. Civilian populations were generally less well trained in recognizing heretical influences, but they were also subject to more intensive monitoring by ecclesiarchy authorities and local security forces. Successful cult recruitment typically began with the identification of individuals who harbored grievances against imperial authority, whether due to economic hardship, personal tragedy, or ideological disagreement with imperial policies. The gradual expansion of these cult networks followed predictable patterns that chaos operatives had refined through centuries of experience. Initial recruitment focused on establishing small cells of trusted converts who could serve as the foundation for larger organizations. These cells would typically begin by providing mutual aid and support to their members, creating bonds of loyalty and dependence that could later be leveraged to ensure compliance with more dangerous activities. The introduction of actual chaos worship was typically delayed until recruits had demonstrated their commitment to the organization and their willingness to engage in activities that violated imperial law. The Ninth Black Crusade expanded upon the institutional corruption tactics developed during the previous campaign, but with a focus on targeting the Adeptus Mechanicus and other technical organizations whose expertise was essential for maintaining imperial technological capabilities. The corruption of tech priests required specialized approaches that took into account their augmented physiology and their religious devotion to the Omnissiah. Chaos operatives found that appeals to forbidden knowledge and promises of technological advancement proved more effective than traditional corruption techniques based on material rewards or emotional manipulation. The development of technoviruses and corrupted machine spirits became a signature weapon of the Ninth Crusade, as chaos forces sought to turn the Imperium's reliance on technology against itself. These digital plagues could spread through imperial communication networks, gradually corrupting the machine spirits that controlled everything from weapon systems to life support equipment. The insidious nature of these attacks made them particularly difficult to detect and counter, as the corruption would often remain dormant for months or years before activating to cause maximum disruption. The assault on the Rise of Forge world demonstrated the effectiveness of combining technological warfare with conventional military operations. Chaos infiltrators had spent years introducing corrupted code into the planet's primary manufactorum control systems, creating backdoors that could be exploited to disable production lines and security systems. When the main assault began, these digital weapons activated simultaneously across hundreds of facilities, creating widespread chaos that prevented effective coordination of the defensive response. The tech priests defending Ryza found themselves fighting not only against external invaders, but also against their own equipment, as corrupted machine spirits turned automated defense systems against Imperial forces. Servitors that should have been defending critical installations instead attacked their own operators, while cogitator systems provided false information that led defending units into ambushes. The psychological impact of this technological betrayal proved as devastating as the physical damage, as tech priests began to question the reliability of their own augmentations and equipment. The capture of Ryza's plasma reactor technology provided Chaos forces with access to advanced energy weapons that significantly enhanced their combat capabilities. The Forge World's research facilities contained experimental designs for plasma weapons that exceeded the performance of standard Imperial equipment, while their manufacturing capabilities allowed for the mass production of these advanced systems. The integration of this technology into Chaos military formations created tactical advantages that would prove decisive in subsequent engagements. The 10th Black Crusade represented the culmination of Abaddon's strategy to establish a permanent Chaos presence within Imperial space, as multiple strongholds established during previous campaigns were linked together into a coherent network of mutually supporting bases. This network provided Chaos forces with the logistical infrastructure needed to sustain long-term operations far from the Eye of Terror, while also creating multiple staging areas for future offensive operations against Imperial targets. The coordination of operations across such a vast network required sophisticated command and control systems that could maintain communication despite Imperial jamming efforts and the inherent unreliability of warp-based communications. Chaos sorcerers developed new techniques for maintaining psychic contact across interstellar distances, while corrupted astropaths provided backup communication capabilities that could operate even when conventional systems were compromised. The redundancy built into these communication networks ensured that individual strongholds could continue operating independently even if cut off from central command. The strengthening of Chaos positions during the 10th Crusade involved not only military fortification, but also the development of industrial and agricultural capabilities that could support large populations of Chaos worshippers. Captured Imperial facilities were modified to produce equipment optimized for Chaos forces, while new construction projects created defensive installations designed according to principles that combined Imperial engineering with daemonic enhancement. These hybrid fortifications possessed capabilities that exceeded purely technological defenses, incorporating warp-based systems that could manipulate probability and reality itself. The recruitment and training of local populations to serve Chaos forces became a critical component of maintaining these permanent strongholds. Imperial civilians who had lived under Chaos occupation for extended periods gradually adapted to their new circumstances, with many embracing Chaos worship as a means of improving their situation or simply surviving under the new regime. These populations provided essential manpower for defensive operations, while also serving as sources of intelligence about Imperial capabilities and intentions. The 11th Black Crusade marked a significant evolution in Chaos naval doctrine, as Abaddon's forces began employing large-scale fleet operations designed to achieve space superiority across entire sectors, rather than simply supporting ground-based objectives. This shift reflected both the growing naval capabilities of Chaos forces and the recognition that control of space lanes was essential for maintaining the network of strongholds established during previous campaigns. The development of specialized anti-Imperial Navy tactics became a priority for Chaos fleet commanders, who recognized that their forces needed to be able to defeat Imperial vessels in conventional engagements rather than relying solely on surprise attacks and technological advantages. Chaos shipyards within the Eye of Terror began producing vessels optimized for fleet combat, incorporating lessons learned from previous engagements while taking advantage of demon-enhanced technologies that provided capabilities unavailable to Imperial forces. The corruption of Imperial Navy personnel became a central component of the 11th Crusade's naval strategy, as Chaos agents worked to subvert entire ship crews and even fleet commands from within. The process of corrupting Imperial Navy officers required careful psychological manipulation that took advantage of the isolation and stress inherent in long-duration space operations. Chaos operatives would typically begin by identifying officers who harbored doubts about Imperial policies or who had experienced personal tragedies that made them vulnerable to offers of supernatural assistance. The naval battles that characterized the 11th Crusade demonstrated the effectiveness of combining corrupted Imperial assets with purpose-built Chaos vessels in coordinated fleet operations. Corrupted Imperial ships could provide intelligence about Imperial tactical doctrines and communication protocols while serving as unexpected allies during what appeared to be conventional fleet engagements. The psychological impact of seeing Imperial vessels firing upon their former comrades proved devastating to Loyalist morale, often causing entire squadrons to withdraw rather than risk facing similar betrayal from their own allies. The establishment of Chaos naval bases within captured systems provided the logistical infrastructure needed to maintain large fleets far from the Eye of Terror. These facilities included not only repair and resupply capabilities, but also the specialized equipment needed to maintain demon-enhanced ship systems and corrupted Imperial technology. The conversion of captured Imperial naval facilities to serve Chaos requirements demonstrated the adaptability of both Imperial technology and Chaos innovation, creating hybrid installations that combine the best features of both design philosophies. The systematic nature of Abaddon's campaigns had forced the Imperium to confront fundamental weaknesses in their post-heresy military doctrine that had remained hidden during the centuries of relative stability following the Great Scouring. The fragmented command structure created by the Codex Astartes reforms, while successful in preventing another large-scale rebellion within the Space Marine legions, had created coordination problems that became increasingly apparent as Chaos forces demonstrated their ability to conduct sophisticated multi-theater operations. The High Lords of Terra recognized that countering the Long War would require unprecedented cooperation between institutions that had been deliberately separated to prevent the concentration of power that had enabled the Horus Heresy. The establishment of rapid response fleets represented the Imperium's first major adaptation to the threat posed by Abaddon's evolving tactical doctrine. These formations were specifically designed to address the mobility advantages that Chaos forces had consistently exploited throughout the early Black Crusades, providing Imperial commanders with the ability to redeploy significant military assets across vast distances within acceptable timeframes. Unlike the sector-based fleets that had characterized Imperial naval doctrine since the heresy, these rapid response formations operated under direct Terran authority and possessed the logistical infrastructure necessary to sustain extended operations far from their home bases. The organizational structure of rapid response fleets reflected lessons learned from analyzing Chaos operational patterns and identifying the specific capabilities needed to counter their advantages. Each fleet included a core of battle cruisers and cruisers optimized for high-speed transit through warp space, their navigational systems enhanced with the finest chronometer arrays and Geller field generators that the Adeptus Mechanicus could provide. These vessels sacrificed some firepower and armor protection in favor of improved engines and reduced mass, allowing them to achieve transit times that approached those of specialized courier ships, while maintaining sufficient combat capability to engage Chaos raiding forces. The integration of specialized reconnaissance assets into rapid response formations provided Imperial commanders with intelligence-gathering capabilities that had been lacking in previous encounters with Chaos forces. Scout squadrons equipped with advanced Auspex arrays and stealth systems could penetrate contested systems to gather tactical intelligence while remaining undetected by enemy forces. These units included modified escort vessels crewed by Imperial Navy personnel trained in covert operations, as well as Space Marine reconnaissance companies equipped with specialized insertion craft designed for long-range infiltration missions. The command structure for rapid response operations required the development of new protocols that could coordinate assets from multiple Imperial institutions while maintaining operational security against Chaos infiltration attempts. Senior naval officers worked alongside Space Marine captains, Inquisition representatives, and Adeptus Mechanicus tech priests to create integrated command teams capable of making tactical decisions that took advantage of each organization's unique capabilities. These joint command structures represented a significant departure from traditional Imperial military hierarchy, requiring extensive training and careful selection of personnel who could function effectively in such collaborative environments. The logistical challenges of maintaining rapid response capabilities across the galaxy's vast distances required innovative solutions that pushed Imperial supply doctrine to its limits. Mobile supply bases constructed from converted bulk haulers and factory ships provided the infrastructure needed to resupply fleet elements operating far from established naval facilities. These floating depots could manufacture ammunition, spare parts, and consumables while serving as mobile repair facilities capable of conducting major overhauls on damaged vessels. The security requirements for these vulnerable but essential assets led to the development of specialized escort formations trained in convoy protection and anti-raider operations. Space Marine chapters had been forced to develop their own adaptive responses to the evolving chaos threat, with many formations abandoning traditional tactical doctrines in favor of approaches specifically optimized for fighting the servants of the dark gods. The Imperial Fists, whose expertise in defensive warfare had been honed during the Siege of Terra, became the primary architects of new fortification techniques designed to counter demon engines and warp-enhanced siege equipment. Their fortress monasteries served as testing grounds for defensive innovations that were subsequently distributed to other chapters and Imperial Guard formations facing similar threats. The development of anti-demon weapons and sanctified ammunition became a priority for chapters operating in regions threatened by chaos incursions. Forge worlds allied with specific chapters began producing specialized bolt rounds inscribed with protective wards and blessed by chaplains before distribution to combat units. These sanctified munitions proved significantly more effective against demonic entities than standard ammunition, though their complex manufacturing requirements limited production to quantities sufficient for elite formations rather than general distribution throughout Imperial forces. The Iron Hands embraced technological solutions to counter chaos corruption, developing augmented sensory systems that could detect warp taint and psychic emanations that might indicate the presence of hidden cultists or infiltrators. Their tech marines worked closely with loyal Adeptus Mechanicus forges to create specialized equipment that combined traditional Imperial technology with innovations derived from studying captured chaos artifacts. These hybrid systems required extensive testing and purification rituals to ensure they remained free from corruptive influences, but they provided capabilities that purely conventional equipment could not match. The Ultramarines' response to the chaos threat emphasized organizational flexibility and rapid adaptation to changing tactical situations. Their companies began training in specialized anti-chaos warfare techniques while maintaining proficiency in conventional Space Marine tactics, creating formations capable of transitioning between different operational modes as battlefield conditions required. The Codex Astartes itself was updated with new tactical doctrines based on combat experience gained during encounters with chaos forces, though these additions required extensive review and approval processes to ensure they did not compromise the document's fundamental principles. The Black Templars adopted an aggressive crusading doctrine that sought to carry the fight directly to chaos strongholds rather than waiting for enemy forces to threaten Imperial territory. Their crusade fleets ranged far from Imperial space, conducting extended campaigns against demon worlds and traitor strongholds within the Eye of Terror itself. These operations required specialized equipment and training to operate in environments where reality itself could be hostile, with chaplains playing expanded roles as both spiritual leaders and tactical commanders capable of maintaining unit cohesion in the face of supernatural threats. The Astra Militarum faced perhaps the greatest challenges in adapting to fight chaos forces effectively, as their conventional training and equipment were poorly suited for combat against enemies who could corrupt machine spirits, summon demons, and employ weapons that violated physical laws. The development of specialized anti-demon tactics required extensive cooperation with the Ecclesiarchy and Adeptus Mechanicus to create new training programs and equipment modifications that could provide ordinary human soldiers with at least some protection against supernatural threats. Cadian shock troops became the template for developing anti-chaos warfare techniques throughout the Imperial Guard, their centuries of experience fighting at the Eye of Terror's edge providing invaluable insights into effective countermeasures against chaos corruption. Training programs developed on Cadia were exported to other worlds facing similar threats, though the unique conditions of each theater required extensive adaptation of basic techniques to local circumstances. The psychological conditioning required to resist chaos influence proved as important as tactical training, requiring cooperation with commissars and ecclesiarchy personnel to ensure that soldiers possessed the mental fortitude necessary for extended operations against heretical forces. The production of specialized equipment for anti-chaos operations strained Imperial manufacturing capacity, as the complex purification rituals and quality control procedures required for such equipment significantly increased production time and resource requirements. Hellguns modified with blessed power cells and sanctified focusing crystals provided enhanced effectiveness against demonic entities, but their manufacture required coordination between multiple Imperial institutions and extensive testing to ensure reliability. Similarly, flak armor enhanced with protective wards and blessed materials offered improved protection against chaos weapons, though the limited availability of such equipment meant that only elite formations could be fully equipped with these enhancements. The development of new artillery techniques, specifically designed for combating chaos forces, led to innovations in both ammunition design and targeting procedures. Blessed shells inscribed with protective prayers proved effective against demon engines and possessed vehicles, while specialized targeting protocols helped artillery crews identify and engage priority targets in the chaotic conditions that typically characterized battles against chaos forces. The coordination required between artillery units, forward observers, and ecclesiarchy personnel to ensure proper blessing and deployment of sanctified munitions created new logistical challenges that required extensive training and preparation. The Inquisition's role in combating the chaos threat extended far beyond their traditional responsibilities for rooting out heresy and corruption, as the systematic nature of Abaddon's campaigns required intelligence gathering and counterintelligence operations on an unprecedented scale. Ordo Malleus Inquisitors worked to develop new techniques for detecting and countering chaos infiltration attempts, while Ordo Hereticus personnel focused on identifying and eliminating the cult networks that supported chaos operations within Imperial territory. The coordination between these different branches of the Inquisition required careful management to prevent jurisdictional conflicts while ensuring comprehensive coverage of all potential threats. The establishment of specialized Inquisition facilities for studying captured chaos artifacts and interrogating prisoners provided valuable intelligence about enemy capabilities and intentions, though such research carried enormous risks of corruption for the personnel involved. These secure installations required extensive protective measures, including multiple layers of psychic shielding, automated purging systems, and carefully screened staff who underwent regular evaluation for signs of heretical influence. The knowledge gained from such research proved invaluable for developing countermeasures against chaos weapons and tactics, but the cost in human resources and the constant risk of catastrophic security breaches made such operations extremely expensive and dangerous. The recruitment and training of specialized anti-chaos operatives required the Inquisition to develop new selection criteria and training programs that could identify individuals capable of resisting corruption while possessing the skills necessary for effective intelligence operations. These agents needed to understand chaos psychology and tactics well enough to predict enemy behavior without being influenced by the knowledge they acquired. The psychological screening process for such operatives was extensive and ongoing, with regular evaluations and purification rituals designed to detect early signs of corruption before they could compromise operations. The development of improved communication security became critical as chaos forces demonstrated their ability to intercept and corrupt Imperial communications networks. Astropathic communications, while generally secure against technological interception, proved vulnerable to psychic interference and corruption by chaos sorcerers who could manipulate warp currents to disrupt or redirect messages. The Adeptus Astra Telepathica worked with the Inquisition to develop new encoding techniques and protective protocols that could maintain communication security even in contested warp space, though these measures required additional training for astropaths and increased the psychic strain of long-distance communication. The establishment of secure communication relay networks required the construction of heavily fortified astropathic stations, equipped with enhanced psychic shielding and defensive systems capable of repelling chaos raiding forces. These installations served as critical nodes in the Imperial communication network, but their strategic importance made them high-priority targets for chaos forces seeking to disrupt Imperial coordination. The protection of these facilities required permanent garrison forces and regular security sweeps to detect infiltration attempts, creating significant ongoing resource requirements for maintaining communication capabilities. The coordination between different Imperial institutions in anti-chaos operations required the development of new protocols and procedures that could overcome traditional jurisdictional boundaries while maintaining operational security. Joint task forces combining Space Marine companies, Imperial Guard regiments, and Inquisition operatives needed standardized communication procedures, compatible equipment, and unified command structures that could function effectively despite the different organizational cultures and operational doctrines of their component units. These integrated formations proved more effective against chaos threats than single-service operations, but they required extensive training and careful leadership to prevent internal conflicts from undermining their effectiveness. The intelligence requirements for effective anti-chaos operations exceeded the capacity of any single Imperial institution, requiring unprecedented cooperation and information sharing between organizations that had traditionally maintained strict operational security. The Inquisition's intelligence networks provided strategic assessments of chaos capabilities and intentions, while Space Marine reconnaissance units gathered tactical intelligence about enemy dispositions and movements. Imperial Guard intelligence sections contributed local knowledge and human intelligence from civilian populations, while the Imperial Navy provided information about enemy fleet movements and logistical patterns. The integration of these different intelligence streams required sophisticated analysis capabilities and secure communication networks that could protect sensitive information while ensuring it reached appropriate decision-makers. The development of predictive analysis techniques allowed Imperial strategists to anticipate chaos operational patterns and deploy countermeasures before enemy forces could achieve their objectives. These analytical methods combined traditional military intelligence assessment with specialized knowledge about chaos psychology and the influence of warp currents on enemy decision-making. The accuracy of such predictions varied significantly depending on the specific chaos forces involved and the complexity of their operational objectives, but even partial success in anticipating enemy moves provided significant tactical advantages for Imperial defenders. The establishment of specialized training facilities for anti-chaos operations created centers of expertise that could develop and disseminate new techniques throughout Imperial military forces. These installations combined conventional military training with instruction in recognizing and countering supernatural threats, requiring cooperation between military instructors, ecclesiarchy personnel, and Inquisition specialists. The curriculum at such facilities included both practical skills like identifying corrupted equipment and theoretical knowledge about chaos tactics and psychology, creating a comprehensive educational program that prepared Imperial personnel for the unique challenges of fighting the Long War. The complex web of alliances that sustained Abaddon's war machine represented one of the most remarkable achievements in the history of chaos warfare, bringing together factions that had spent millennia locked in bitter feuds and territorial disputes. The Despoiler's ability to forge cooperation between the scattered remnants of the traitor legions required not only military genius, but also an understanding of the deep-seated grievances and competing ambitions that had driven these forces apart since their exile to the Eye of Terror. Each legion brought its own tactical expertise and resources to the coalition, but they also carried the burden of ancient rivalries that threatened to tear the alliance apart at critical moments. The Death Guard's integration into Abaddon's campaigns demonstrated both the potential and the challenges of coordinating forces dedicated to different aspects of chaos worship. Mortarian's sons had embraced Nurgle's gifts so completely that their very presence could corrupt Imperial equipment and demoralize enemy forces, but their single-minded devotion to the Plague Father sometimes conflicted with broader strategic objectives. During the Siege of Mordian, Death Guard forces had insisted on employing viral weapons that would have rendered the planet uninhabitable for centuries, forcing Abaddon to intervene personally to prevent the destruction of valuable industrial assets that the Coalition needed for future operations. The Plague Marines, who formed the backbone of Death Guard formations, had undergone transformations that made them nearly indestructible, but also fundamentally altered their tactical priorities. Their bloated, disease-ridden bodies moved with surprising grace through the most hazardous environments, their ancient power armor fused with rotting flesh and mechanical augmentations that defied both Imperial and Chaos understanding of technology. The miasma of decay that surrounded these warriors could corrode enemy weapons and armor while spreading plagues that weakened entire populations, but their methodical approach to warfare often clashed with the rapid strike tactics favored by other elements of the Black Legion. Typhus, the Herald of Nurgle and first captain of the Death Guard, had emerged as one of Abaddon's most valuable but unpredictable allies. The ancient Terminator's mastery of biological warfare and his ability to summon vast swarms of demon flies made him invaluable for siege operations and planetary assaults, but his complete devotion to spreading Nurgle's gifts throughout the galaxy sometimes led him to pursue objectives that served the Plague Father's agenda rather than the Coalition's immediate military needs. The delicate balance between utilizing Typhus's capabilities and preventing his forces from undermining broader campaign objectives required constant diplomatic maneuvering from Abaddon's inner circle. The Thousand Sons brought psychic capabilities that no other faction within the Coalition could match, their sorcerers wielding powers that could manipulate time, space, and reality itself to achieve tactical advantages impossible through conventional means. Magnus the Red Scattered Sons had developed new techniques for coordinating their abilities across vast distances, creating psychic networks that could provide real-time intelligence and communication even in the most chaotic battle conditions. Their Rubric Marines, animated suits of armor containing the dust of their former occupants, fought with perfect discipline and unwavering loyalty, though their lack of initiative required constant direction from their sorcerer commanders. Ahriman, the exiled chief librarian whose rubric had transformed so many of his battle brothers into automata, maintained an uneasy relationship with both Magnus and Abaddon's coalition. His independent operations often served the broader goals of the Long War, but his obsession with undoing the effects of his great spell sometimes led him to pursue objectives that conflicted with immediate military priorities. The knowledge contained within his massive libraries of forbidden lore proved invaluable for understanding Imperial defenses and developing countermeasures against loyalist psychers, but accessing this information required delicate negotiations that acknowledged his autonomous status within the broader chaos hierarchy. The World Eaters represented perhaps the most challenging element to integrate into coordinated military operations, their devotion to Khorne having transformed them into berserkers whose primary tactical doctrine involved charging directly at the strongest enemy formations while screaming praises to the blood god. The surgical implantation of butchers' nails into their craniums had fundamentally altered their neurological structure, replacing strategic thinking with an overwhelming compulsion toward violence that made conventional military discipline impossible to maintain. Yet their fearless assault capabilities and psychological impact on enemy forces made them invaluable shock troops when properly directed toward appropriate targets. Karn the Betrayer's reputation extended far beyond his own legion, his presence on any battlefield guaranteeing that the fighting would escalate to levels of brutality that exceeded even the normal standards of the Long War. The ancient warrior's tactical acumen, honed through millennia of constant warfare, allowed him to identify the most effective ways to channel his berserker fury towards strategically valuable objectives. His chain-axe Gorechild, enhanced with demon-forged components, could cleave through Terminator armor with ease, while his ability to inspire nearby warriors to greater acts of violence created cascading effects that could shatter entire enemy formations. The coordination of World Eater's forces with other elements of the coalition required specialized command techniques that took into account their unpredictable nature and tendency toward friendly fire incidents. Abaddon's tactical staff had developed deployment patterns that maximized the Berserkers' impact on enemy forces while minimizing the risk of them attacking their own allies in the heat of battle. These formations typically involved using World Eaters as the spearhead of major assaults, with other forces positioned to exploit the confusion and terror created by their initial charge, while remaining far enough away to avoid becoming targets themselves. The Emperor's children brought a different kind of tactical challenge, their pursuit of perfection through excess having led them to develop increasingly exotic weapons and combat techniques that prioritized artistic expression over military efficiency. Their noise marines wielded sonic weapons that could shatter enemy armor and disrupt communications, while creating cacophonous symphonies that served as both psychological warfare and aesthetic achievement. The sensory overload created by these weapons proved devastating to Imperial forces, but their unpredictable effects sometimes interfered with other Chaos units operating in the same area. Fulgrim's scattered sons had fragmented into numerous smaller warbands, each pursuing their own interpretation of their Primarch's teachings about the pursuit of perfection. Some focused on perfecting combat techniques, developing martial arts that combined superhuman speed with deadly precision. Others sought perfection through technological enhancement, modifying their bodies and equipment with increasingly exotic augmentations that blurred the line between flesh and machine. The diversity of approaches within the Emperor's children made them valuable for specialized operations, but difficult to coordinate in large-scale campaigns. The integration of renegade Space Marine chapters into Abaddon's coalition had accelerated significantly during the later Black Crusades, as entire formations abandoned their loyalty to the Imperium and sought new purpose under the War Master's banner. The Red Corsairs, led by Huron Blackheart, had brought not only their own considerable military capabilities, but also extensive networks of contacts throughout the Imperium's frontier regions. Their knowledge of Imperial patrol patterns, supply routes, and defensive installations proved invaluable for planning raids and infiltration operations. Blackheart's transformation from Loyalist chapter master to Chaos warlord had been driven by disillusionment with Imperial bureaucracy and resource allocation rather than corruption by the Dark Gods, making him a valuable ally who retained much of his original tactical thinking while embracing the freedom that came with rejecting Imperial authority. The Astral Claw's rebellion against the Imperium had demonstrated that even Loyalist chapters could be pushed to breaking point by administrative incompetence and political interference, providing a template that Chaos agents could exploit to encourage similar defections throughout the galaxy. The Alpha Legion's role within Abaddon's coalition remained deliberately obscured, their agents operating according to plans that might serve the War Master's objectives or pursue entirely different agendas that only became apparent years or decades after their implementation. The 20th Legion's expertise in infiltration, sabotage, and psychological warfare made them invaluable for preparing the ground for major offensive operations, but their secretive nature and tendency toward independent action created constant uncertainty about their true loyalties and objectives. Al-Farius and Omgon's legacy lived on through their scattered operatives, many of whom had spent millennia establishing deep cover identities within Imperial institutions while waiting for activation orders that might never come. The discovery and activation of these sleeper agents provided Chaos forces with intelligence assets positioned at the highest levels of Imperial government and military command, but the process of verifying their loyalty and coordinating their activities required extensive security measures to prevent Imperial counterintelligence operations from identifying and eliminating entire networks. The recruitment of corrupted Imperial Guard regiments provided Abaddon's coalition with the mass infantry formations necessary for large-scale planetary assaults, while also supplying expertise in logistics, artillery support, and conventional warfare that complemented the specialized capabilities of Chaos Space Marines. The process of turning entire regiments from Imperial service to Chaos worship required careful psychological manipulation and gradual exposure to heretical influences, but successful conversions provided forces that retained their original training and equipment while serving new masters. The Steel Legion regiments that had fallen to Chaos during the Armageddon campaigns demonstrated the effectiveness of combining Imperial military doctrine with Chaos enhancement, their mechanized infantry tactics proving devastatingly effective against Loyalist forces who expected to face conventional enemy formations. These corrupted soldiers possessed detailed knowledge of Imperial procedures and equipment that allowed them to anticipate and counter standard defensive measures, while their fanatical devotion to the Dark Gods provided them with morale and determination that exceeded their former Imperial conditioning. Cultist militias drawn from Imperial civilian populations provided the numerical strength necessary for occupation duties and garrison operations, freeing elite Chaos Space Marine formations for offensive operations against high-priority targets. These irregular forces typically lacked the training and equipment of professional military units, but their intimate knowledge of local conditions and their willingness to accept massive casualties in pursuit of their objectives made them valuable assets for specific types of operations. The diversity of backgrounds represented within cultist formations allowed Chaos commanders to assemble specialized units optimized for particular mission requirements. The integration of demonic allies into conventional military operations required extensive coordination between mortal commanders and entities whose motivations and capabilities transcended normal understanding of warfare. Greater demons served as living weapons of mass destruction, whose presence on battlefields could inspire Chaos forces to superhuman efforts while terrorizing enemy formations into flight or surrender. However, the summoning rituals required to manifest these entities demanded significant resources and carried enormous risks of uncontrolled consequences that could prove as dangerous to Chaos forces as to their enemies. Bloodthirsters of Khorne brought unmatched combat capabilities to major engagements, their massive forms capable of carving through enemy formations, while inspiring nearby Chaos warriors to greater acts of violence. The demon's supernatural resilience allowed it to absorb punishment that would destroy conventional vehicles, while its ability to fly provided tactical mobility that could be exploited to strike at enemy weak points or bypass defensive positions. The psychological impact of facing such entities proved devastating to Imperial morale, often causing entire formations to break and flee rather than attempting to engage in combat. The tactical employment of demon princes required commanders who understood both their capabilities and their limitations, as these ascended mortals operated according to supernatural logic that often conflicted with conventional military thinking. A demon prince's personal agenda might align with immediate tactical objectives, but their long-term goals typically served their patron god's interests rather than mortal strategic plans. The management of these relationships required constant diplomatic effort and careful attention to the complex hierarchy of obligations and favors that governed interactions between different levels of Chaos society. The establishment of demon worlds within captured Imperial territory provided Chaos forces with forward operating bases that could support extended campaigns while serving as recruitment centers for new converts to the Dark God's service. These transformed planets operated according to the whims of their demonic inhabitants, their physical laws altered by warp influence to create environments where conventional Imperial forces could not function effectively. The process of planetary transformation required extensive ritual preparation and the sacrifice of millions of lives to provide the psychic energy necessary for such fundamental alterations to reality. The coordination of operations across multiple demon worlds required communication methods that could function despite the chaotic nature of warp space and the unpredictable effects of demonic influence on conventional technology. Chaos sorcerers developed new techniques for maintaining psychic contact across interstellar distances, while corrupted astropaths provided backup communication capabilities that could operate even when standard systems were compromised by warp storms or Imperial jamming efforts. The redundancy built into these networks ensured that individual strongholds could continue operating independently, even if cut off from central command. The recruitment of Xeno's allies represented one of the most controversial aspects of Abaddon's coalition-building efforts, as cooperation with non-human species violated fundamental Imperial doctrines while providing access to capabilities that no human faction possessed. Dark Eldar raiding parties occasionally coordinated with Chaos forces when their objectives aligned, their superior speed and exotic weapons providing tactical advantages that could prove decisive in specific engagements. However, these alliances remained temporary and opportunistic, as the fundamental incompatibility between Chaos worship and Eldar psychology prevented any lasting cooperation. Orc warbands operating within the Eye of Terror had developed unique relationships with Chaos forces, their natural affinity for violence and destruction making them valuable allies in specific circumstances, while their unpredictable nature and tendency toward infighting limited their utility for complex operations. The Greenskins' ability to rapidly reproduce and adapt to new environments made them ideal for garrison duties on demon worlds, where conventional forces might succumb to environmental hazards or supernatural influences. Their crude but effective technology could be enhanced with Chaos modifications, creating hybrid weapons and vehicles that combined orc ingenuity with demonic power. The management of such diverse coalitions required Abaddon to maintain careful balances between competing factions, while ensuring that their combined efforts served his ultimate objective of destroying the Imperium. The Despoiler's political skills proved as important as his military genius, as he navigated the complex web of alliances, rivalries, and obligations that bound his forces together. His ability to remain independent of any single Chaos god, while accepting gifts from all four, provided him with the flexibility necessary to coordinate factions that might otherwise have been unable to work together effectively. The establishment of the Ezekarian as Abaddon's inner circle provided a mechanism for managing the most important relationships within the coalition, while ensuring that critical decisions could be made quickly despite the diverse interests represented within the broader alliance. Each member of this elite group brought their own followers and resources, while serving as a representative of different factions within the Chaos hierarchy. The careful balance of personalities and capabilities within the Ezekarian reflected Abaddon's understanding that successful leadership required not only personal charisma, but also the ability to delegate authority to trusted subordinates who could handle specialized aspects of coalition management. The long-term sustainability of such complex alliances required constant attention to the distribution of resources, objectives, and recognition among the various factions involved. Success in battle needed to be shared equitably to prevent any single group from feeling marginalized or exploited, while failures had to be managed in ways that maintained overall coalition cohesion despite the natural tendency toward blame and recrimination that characterized Chaos politics. Abaddon's ability to navigate these challenges while maintaining forward momentum in the Long War demonstrated political skills that rivaled those of the greatest imperial administrators and military commanders. The strategic preparations for what would become the 13th Black Crusade began decades before the first Chaos vessels emerged from the Eye of Terror, representing the culmination of Abaddon's 10,000-year campaign to perfect the art of warfare against the Imperium. The Despoiler had learned from every previous engagement, analyzing Imperial responses and identifying the critical weaknesses that could be exploited to achieve not merely tactical victories, but fundamental strategic transformation of the galactic balance of power. Unlike the earlier Crusades that had focused on specific sectors or limited objectives, the 13th would target the very foundations of imperial defensive doctrine by striking at Cadia itself with overwhelming force. The intelligence-gathering phase for this ultimate campaign had required unprecedented coordination between chaos spy networks operating throughout imperial space. Corrupted astropaths provided detailed information about imperial fleet movements and communication protocols, while infiltrated tech priests offered comprehensive technical specifications for Cadia's defensive installations and the fortress world's critical infrastructure. The most valuable intelligence came from sleeper agents within the Cadian command structure itself, operatives who had spent decades establishing their credentials and gaining access to the most sensitive strategic planning documents. The scale of military preparation required for a direct assault on the Cadian Gate exceeded anything attempted since the Siege of Terra. Abaddon's coalition had grown to encompass virtually every major chaos faction within the Eye of Terror, from the original traitor legions to countless renegade chapters, demon princes, and corrupted Imperial Guard regiments that had fallen to heresy over the millennia. The coordination of such diverse forces required sophisticated command structures and communication networks that could function despite the chaotic nature of warp space and the inherent unpredictability of entities touched by the Dark God's influence. The Blackstone Fortress that Abaddon had captured during the Gothic War became the centerpiece of his assault strategy, its ancient weapon systems providing the firepower necessary to threaten even Cadia's massive defensive installations. The fortress had been extensively modified by corrupted tech priests and demon-possessed machine spirits, its alien technology enhanced with chaos innovations that pushed its capabilities beyond their original parameters. The resulting hybrid construct combined the precision and reliability of Necron engineering with the raw power and unpredictability of warp-touched enhancements, creating a weapon system that could potentially crack planetary surfaces or destroy entire fleets with concentrated fire. The technical challenges of operating such ancient and corrupted technology required the expertise of the most skilled sorcerers and tech adepts within Abaddon's coalition. Thousand Sons librarians worked alongside Dark Mechanicus Magi to decipher the fortress's control systems, their combined knowledge of Xenotech and forbidden lore allowing them to unlock capabilities that the Imperium had never discovered during their own studies of similar constructs. The psychic resonance required to interface with the fortress's machine spirit demanded constant attention from multiple psychers working in carefully coordinated shifts, as the mental strain of maintaining such contact could prove fatal to even experienced sorcerers. The preliminary operations began with coordinated strikes against Imperial monitoring stations and communication relays throughout the sectors surrounding the Cadian Gate, creating blind spots in the early warning network that would allow the main assault force to approach undetected. These attacks were carried out by advance elements operating independently of the main fleet, using small, fast vessels equipped with specialized jamming equipment and stealth technologies derived from captured Imperial Navy assets. The pattern of destruction was carefully designed to appear random and uncoordinated, concealing the true scope and objectives of the coming campaign from Imperial intelligence analysts. The Imperial response to these preliminary attacks revealed both improvements in their coordination, since previous chaos incursions, and fundamental limitations that Abaddon's forces were prepared to exploit. Lord Castellan Ursarkar Creed, the supreme commander of Cadian defenses, recognized the strategic implications of the raiding pattern and attempted to implement more aggressive patrol schedules designed to intercept chaos forces before they could reach their targets. However, his efforts were hampered by the vast distances involved and the limited number of vessels available for extended patrol duties beyond the immediate vicinity of the fortress world itself. The main assault began when Abaddon's fleet emerged from the warp at multiple points throughout the Cadian system simultaneously, their coordinated appearance creating a crisis that overwhelmed the Imperial defenders' ability to respond effectively. The Chaos Armada represented the largest concentration of hostile naval power assembled since the Horus Heresy, with hundreds of capital ships supported by thousands of escort vessels, transports, and specialized assault craft. The sheer scale of the invasion force made it impossible for Imperial commanders to concentrate their defenses at any single point, forcing them to divide their attention and resources among multiple simultaneous threats. The Blackstone Fortress approached Cadia along a trajectory that maximized its firing opportunities while minimizing exposure to the planet's orbital defense platforms. The ancient construct's weapon systems began charging as soon as it entered the system's outer reaches, their energy buildup creating massive distortions in local space that interfered with Imperial sensors and communication systems. The fortress's approach was protected by squadrons of Chaos vessels that engaged Imperial fleet elements attempting to intercept the planet-killer weapon, their sacrifice buying precious time for the fortress to reach optimal firing position. Imperial naval forces under Admiral Quarren fought desperately to prevent the Blackstone Fortress from achieving a clear shot at Cadia's surface, their vessels conducting coordinated attack runs that sought to disable the construct's weapon systems before they could fire. The ancient fortress's defensive capabilities proved formidable, its alien shields absorbing tremendous amounts of punishment, while automated weapon systems returned devastating fire that crippled or destroyed entire squadrons of attacking Imperial vessels. The void battles that raged around the fortress created debris fields that further complicated tactical maneuvering for both sides. The ground assault on Cadia began before the orbital battle had been decided, as Chaos drop pods and assault craft penetrated the planet's atmospheric defenses to deliver the first wave of invaders directly to key strategic locations. The initial landings targeted communication centers, void shield generators, and command bunkers whose destruction would cripple the defenders' ability to coordinate their response to the larger invasion. These precision strikes were carried out by elite Chaos Space Marine formations, equipped with specialized equipment for rapid insertion and urban warfare operations. The Cadian shock troops defending their homeworld fought with the desperate fury of soldiers who knew that defeat meant not only their own destruction, but the collapse of humanity's primary bulwark against chaos. Their knowledge of every defensive position and prepared killing ground on the planet's surface allowed them to extract maximum casualties from the invading forces while conducting fighting withdrawals that preserved their combat effectiveness for continued resistance. The fortress cities that covered Cadia's continents became scenes of brutal urban warfare as Chaos forces attempted to seize critical installations, while Imperial defenders fought from prepared positions optimized for exactly this scenario. Lord Castellan Creed's tactical genius became evident as the battle progressed, his ability to coordinate defensive operations across multiple theaters while maintaining communication with scattered units demonstrating why he was considered one of the Imperium's finest military commanders. His use of combined arms tactics and flexible defensive strategies extracted maximum advantage from Cadia's fortified terrain while conserving his forces for the decisive engagements that would determine the planet's fate. The Castellan's personal leadership inspired the defenders to superhuman efforts, his presence on the battlefield serving as a rallying point for units that might otherwise have been overwhelmed by the scale of the enemy assault. The arrival of Space Marine reinforcements from multiple chapters provided the defenders with elite support that could match the capabilities of Chaos Space Marines in direct combat. Imperial Fist's companies brought expertise in defensive warfare that complemented the Cadians' knowledge of their fortifications, while Black Templar's Crusaders added offensive punch that could disrupt enemy assault formations. The coordination between these disparate Imperial forces required careful management of resources and tactical priorities, but their combined efforts created defensive capabilities that exceeded the sum of their individual contributions. The Siege of Cadia's primary fortress complex became the focal point of the ground campaign, as both sides recognized that control of this installation would determine the outcome of the planetary battle. The massive structure incorporated multiple layers of defensive systems, including void shields, automated weapon turrets, and underground bunker networks that could shelter the planet's command staff even if surface facilities were destroyed. Chaos forces launched repeated assaults against the fortress's outer perimeter, their attacks combining conventional military tactics with demon summoning and warp-based assault methods that sought to bypass physical defenses entirely. The Blackstone Fortresses' first shot at Cadia's surface created a massive crater that destroyed an entire fortress city and killed millions of defenders, the ancient weapon's power exceeding even the most pessimistic Imperial estimates of its capabilities. The psychic shockwave generated by such massive destruction rippled across the planet's surface, causing widespread panic among civilian populations while disrupting communication networks and sensor systems throughout the defensive grid. The demonstration of the fortress's destructive potential forced Imperial commanders to accelerate their evacuation plans while simultaneously preparing for the final defense of critical installations. Creed's final gambit involved the activation of previously hidden defensive systems that had been held in reserve for exactly this scenario, massive underground weapon installations that could engage the Blackstone Fortress from unexpected angles while providing some protection against its devastating return fire. These installations represented decades of preparation and resource allocation, their construction having been concealed from Imperial records to prevent enemy intelligence from identifying and targeting them during the preliminary phases of any assault. The weapon's activation caught Chaos forces by surprise, their coordinated fire inflicting significant damage on the fortress's superstructure while forcing it to adjust its approach vector. The evacuation of Imperial survivors from Cadia became a desperate race against time as the planet's defenses crumbled under the combined pressure of orbital bombardment and ground assault. Transport vessels operating under heavy enemy fire struggled to reach designated pickup points while avoiding the debris and energy discharges that made atmospheric flight increasingly hazardous. The evacuation priorities focused on preserving critical personnel and equipment that could contribute to continued resistance elsewhere, though the limited transport capacity forced commanders to make agonizing decisions about which assets could be saved and which would have to be abandoned. The final moments of Cadia's resistance saw Lord Castellan Creed making his last stand in the planet's primary command bunker, coordinating the evacuation of remaining Imperial forces while directing artillery strikes against advancing Chaos formations. His tactical brilliance remained evident even in defeat, as he managed to extract far more Imperial personnel and equipment than enemy projections had suggested would be possible. The Castellan's fate became uncertain when the command bunker was overrun by Chaos forces, though reports of his survival and continued resistance would inspire Imperial forces throughout the subsequent campaigns. The Blackstone Fortress's final bombardment of Cadia created geological instabilities that propagated throughout the planet's core, the ancient weapon's power proving sufficient to trigger catastrophic tectonic activity that would ultimately destroy the entire world. The fortress world that had stood as humanity's bulwark against chaos for 10,000 years began breaking apart under the combined effects of orbital bombardment and internal structural collapse. The destruction of Cadia sent shockwaves throughout the Imperium, both literally through the warp and figuratively through the Imperial command structure that had relied on the fortress world as an unbreachable barrier against chaos expansion. The shattering of Cadia triggered the expansion of the Great Rift, a massive warp storm that split the galaxy in half and fundamentally altered the strategic situation throughout Imperial space. The stable warp routes that had made the Cadian Gate such a critical choke point were replaced by chaotic currents that allowed Chaos forces to emerge throughout the galaxy, while simultaneously disrupting Imperial communication and transportation networks. The Rift's expansion created new demon worlds within previously secure Imperial territory, while cutting off entire sectors from contact with Terra and the broader Imperium. The strategic implications of Cadia's fall extended far beyond the immediate military consequences, as the fortress world's destruction marked the end of the Imperium's ability to contain chaos expansion through defensive strategies alone. The Great Rift's presence made it impossible to predict where enemy forces might emerge, forcing Imperial commanders to adopt more flexible and mobile defensive doctrines that could respond to threats appearing anywhere within their territory. The psychological impact on Imperial morale proved equally significant, as the loss of humanity's most famous fortress world demonstrated that even the most heavily defended positions could fall to determined chaos assault. The emergence of the Cicatrix Maledictum ushered in the era Indomitus, a new period of galactic history characterized by unprecedented levels of warfare and instability. The Great Rift's influence on warp travel and astropathic communication created logistical challenges that strained the Imperium's ability to coordinate responses to multiple simultaneous threats, while the demon incursions that accompanied the Rift's expansion required new tactical approaches and specialized equipment that existing Imperial forces were poorly equipped to provide. The fragmentation of Imperial territory into isolated pockets of resistance created opportunities for local warlords and heretical movements, while making it increasingly difficult for central authority to maintain control over distant sectors. Abaddon's achievement in destroying Cadia and creating the Great Rift represented the culmination of his 10,000-year campaign to weaken the Imperium through systematic warfare and strategic patience. The Despoiler had succeeded where Horus had failed, not through a single decisive battle, but through the gradual erosion of Imperial strength and the exploitation of systemic weaknesses that had been built into the Imperium's post-heresy structure. The 13th Black Crusade's success validated his approach to the Long War while establishing the foundation for future campaigns that could potentially threaten Terra itself. The fall of Cadia marked not the end of Imperial resistance, but rather the beginning of a new phase of the Long War, as both sides adapted to the changed strategic environment created by the Great Rift's presence. The Imperium's response would require fundamental changes to military doctrine, resource allocation, and strategic planning that went far beyond simple tactical adjustments. The galaxy had been permanently transformed by the events of the 13th Black Crusade, setting the stage for conflicts that would determine the ultimate fate of humanity and the Imperium that claimed to protect it. The Long War had entered its most critical phase, with the very survival of human civilization hanging in the balance, as Chaos forces pressed their advantage against an enemy whose greatest defensive bastion had finally fallen after 10 millennia of defiant resistance.